So, welcome back everyone. Sorry for the delayed starting, but we're going to go up until about approximately 1:30 Pacific time. What I want to start with is, I just want to reiterate, right? So for the coming week, I want to invite you all to, above all, try these practices on your own and come back to these sessions with concerns, questions, doubts, results, positive, negative, whatever experiences, because I think the most valuable thing that I can offer is, responses to those things. So I want to open the floor by starting with anybody, this evening, had any questions regarding the practice, generally speaking. In fact, someone approached me just before and asked a question and I thought it was a good question, so I thought I'd have her repeat it for the group and I'll answer it here.
Okay. So, Akilesh, what I was telling you was yesterday when you were asking about our experience with inquiry, my experience was somewhat similar to what Sriram mentioned and what Krishnan mentioned. In the sense, when I was looking for where is this I, initially it was in my heart, and then it kind of was in my head, and then as I kept inquiring about it, I kind of had this, yes, I have a feeling of me.
Yes.
But then, like you said, I said, to whom is that feeling happening?
Yes.
And then I kind of hit the wall because I couldn't go beyond that.
Yeah.
So, and I know when you answered Krishnan's question on that, is how do you go beyond it?
Yes.
You mentioned that you're not able to go beyond it because of attachments.
Yeah, right.
And my question is, how do I even go about identifying those attachments? Said how, so are there tips for that?
Yes.
Of identifying, because my mind can make up things, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is not an attachment. You really think it's a, so your mind can play games with you.
Yes.
So
yes.
how do I, in a practical way, how do I even go about identifying these attachments and working through it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to say a few different things. So first of all, there's two different pieces here, actually, I should say. So yeah, attachments is a big piece, no doubt about it. We should recognize, when we hit the so-called wall, right, that you're still working with something, right? So, recognize, right, that, okay, I can't seem to go beyond, right, but how should I put this? We shouldn't take that as final, right? You are there, right? You are there, let's say, aware of the feeling in your head, suppose, right? What's happened then is that the feeling of I, quote unquote, has gotten subtler, essentially, but it's still quite there, So I mean, again, it's a kind of maddening paradox to the mind, because the one who finds it impossible to go beyond the wall, again, you're aware of being, so-called being that person, right? I cannot seem to go beyond this, right? But that sense, it's there. It's got to be there somewhere, right? So don't stop, trying to lock on to what this is. In a way, it's sort of like it's like there's a strange metaphor in the Bible somewhere where it says something like, I think Jesus says something like, don't worry about the splinter in your neighbor's eye when you've got a beam in your own, And I mean, he's referring to something quite different, which is this idea of, criticizing other people. But I actually think there's a real analogy here in a different way to what is going on in self-inquiry. Because effectively, I am in some way like a giant, kind of log in my own eye. Strangely enough, like there's a kind of big thing that it's stuck. It's almost stuck. This is a metaphor, but it's kind of stuck in this hole, and so we had to put this enormous energy into trying to pull it out. Really, that's what's going on in a strange sense, and so. What happens is as you are doing the inquiry process, and you're trying hard to hunt I, you're locking on slowly to this kind of log in your eye, so to say. I mean, again, unfortunately, we have to use the same word, E-Y-E, I, again and again. It's confusing, but the point is that that it's stuck there. It's stuck, it's like something which is jammed into something, and so you're going to have to use a lot of concentration over time to pull it out. The thing is, it's there. It's there, right? The thing is, it's jammed in really hard, so to say, and so it's going to take a good amount of effort. But my point in saying all of this is, come back again and again and again to the sense that you are experiencing it after all. The fact that you're experiencing it should make you determine that, how can something that I'm literally experiencing right this second, it must be here. It's got to be here somewhere. I'm experiencing it, right? So don't stop the search just because you hit a wall, right? What's happened is it requires more intensity of concentration, essentially, right? It's something like, I give more metaphors, right? It's like you're reading something, and as you're reading it, the font gets smaller and smaller. It requires more and more squinting, more and more concentration to read it. And suppose you are on a like a carousel or something like that at the same time, which is going around and around, right? That's like the mind's movement, right? So it's already hard to read small print. When the mind is spinning, it makes it even harder, right? So this is the challenge that's going on, but it's right there, it's there. You can see it. It's there. But can I focus enough to see it, right? And as you try to see it, it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. But it's there. It's most certainly there. So this is the kind of challenge you're dealing with. Now, right, in this analogy of this merry-go-round or whatever, carousel or whatever that's spinning and making it harder to read, that would be linked to this question of the attachments, okay? Because what are the attachments? Attachments are concerns that you have based on your identity as a person that then lead the mind to execute certain projects, desires, fears, and so on and so forth, and they move the mind accordingly. And the movement of the mind then makes it hard to see this very subtle thing, essentially, extremely subtle thing. So how do we identify what the attachments are? Well, there's a number of ways to do that. But one thing is the most basic way is we're trying to do the practice. Most people will be just trying for a long, long time to do the practice at every waking moment. When you try to do this, you're going to start to see patterns about when the practice is interrupted. You're going to be like, oh yeah, well I didn't do the practice here. I forgot about it for 4 hours there, or 2 days, or 3 weeks, or whatever it is, When you start to see those patterns, try to see what was going on in your life or in your mind during those times. Because what's happening is that there's a decision being made, something else has to take priority of the practice right now. Whatever that something else is, are your attachments. So, and it may not be entirely obvious all the time what they are, because, as I've mentioned yesterday, I'm a big proponent of psychoanalysis in particular. That's not all therapy, it's a very specific kind of therapy. And in psychoanalysis, you have, not just psychoanalysis, but generally speaking, you have this idea, even in Vedanta, of the unconscious. And there are tendencies and vasanas that are not, of which we're not completely aware. So it may not be obvious all the time what exactly the relevant attachment is. So yeah, in that case, therapy can be useful. I'll reiterate, but sometimes it may take some doing sometimes to find out what's the pattern here. Like what exactly? Okay, I had trouble practicing here and here and here and here and here. Sometimes it's very obvious. Oh yeah, okay, I'm worried about my work. It's very hard to do it when I'm working. That seems more straightforward. Sometimes it may not be so straightforward. Sometimes it may be something more obscure. In which case it may take more experimentation to find out just what's going on. But something's going on. Every time your practice is interrupted, some attachment has arisen, basically. And so, and once you start identifying some of these patterns, what I suggest you do is, again, apart from the therapy recommendation, is if, for example, okay, I'm going to be meeting with a certain person, this person, raises my blood pressure and makes it hard to practice, you start to anticipate certain situations, because because the basic attitude you want to have is, I'm trying to sustain this at all times. I'm trying to sustain this at all times, right? And so knowing, for example, in 15 minutes when you're meeting with this person, that's going to make it difficult to sustain, start to prepare yourself in advance. Like, okay, this is going to make it harder, right? More like preparation you have that way mentally, the more able you will be to steady yourself in that situation, basically, you know. So yeah, does that basically answer the question?
Yeah. So journaling would help.
Journaling could absolutely help. Yeah, absolutely. So yes, because then you can note down. I mean, that's a great thing to do. You know, note down exactly what is happening that day in the practice, basically. You know, have a little practice journal. Sure.
You mentioned the word concentration to go beyond the whatever is obstructing our inquiry. But I mean, I just wanted to clarify on that because in my experience, to use the analogy that you gave yesterday, where you lose a key, and if I'm frantically searching for it, if I'm trying to concentrate and trying to think, I rarely find where I left it. I mean, it doesn't help the search. What helps is forget about it, get distracted, do something else, and suddenly you discover it. So it's not concentration that helped me find it. It's just let go, relax, and suddenly you discover.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. That can sometimes happen too. I think what happens is there's it's a really good point. I think there is a dynamic back and forth between concentration and relaxation. You know, so your job is to put in the concentration part, but sometimes you know, you'll be involuntarily swept into the relaxation part anyhow. And you're right. So because what happens is when you do concentrate like this on the practice, ultimately what happens is at a certain point, if your concentration has been sufficient, you will, you know, grace will descend for a moment, even if only for a moment, then it would be a glimpse, let's say. That grace is in effect lifting of your concentration. There's a point where concentration cannot go any further. You know, concentration leads you to that point, actually, right? Because usually, right, you can think about like scientists, mathematicians, creative people who all talk about how relaxation, they get their, you know, some amazing inspiration during relaxed moments. True, but that's in the context of having done a lot of prior work, right? So a lot of work goes in, effort goes in, and then there's a kind of period of relaxation where something might erupt, you know? So in the same way, it's true, you know, in some sense, you might practice and practice and practice and practice and practice, and you might hit a wall and hit a wall and hit a wall and hit a wall and hit a wall, and at some point you might even essentially give up, right? But in that moment of giving up, then something might emerge. It's not actually just from the giving up, it's because you put in all the stuff beforehand. So, you know, it's that combination of that, I would say.
Is it the grace you're talking about? Say, Bhagavan says that beyond a point, it's not in your control.
Correct.
The mind cannot go there. Only way you go past that is somebody will, God will pull you in.
Correct. Yes,
right?
yes.
Is that the...
Yes, absolutely, correct. It can only go so far, that's right. The mind can only go, the deliberate effort can only go so far. Because the one who feels like they're putting in that deliberate effort must himself or herself be, in some sense, you know, suppressed for going further. So that one cannot suppress themselves. They have to be suppressed by something higher, some higher force, basically. So all they can do is they can go thus far into the temple, and then at the door to the inner sanctum, something else has to seize them. You know, which will happen if they go that far.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Huh?
Another question, a small question.
Sure. Please go ahead.
So yesterday, after the session, I was just contemplating on what we discussed, and there's one point where I was unable to resolve. So you said when we have a glimpse of seeing the flawless mirror reflecting the truth of who we are, and then when we come out of that state, the regular state, waking state, then we play the game of life with that experience. In other words, we are a transformed person. That's how I understood it.
Okay.
So that we have the glimpse of who we are, and then we play the game of life. But later on, you also mentioned that when we have glimpses of that, it might be transient, it might be momentary. And when we come back, we are the same old person.
Correct.
So do we get transformed or do we not get transformed? because of those.
Yeah. So okay. So
Transformed in the sense at the level of the mind.
So yeah, exactly. So I wouldn't say, right. So once okay. So I'm differentiating technically. There's really multiple ways of looking at this. I'm differentiating between temporary glimpses and quote unquote permanent realization. But of course, the irony is that permanent realization is a bit of a contradiction in terms. And what is the content of that realization? The content of that realization is in part, there was no seeker, there was no quest, there was no finding, there was no realization. That's the content of the realization. I don't think, honestly, I would use that. I mean, I don't know who you may have been listening to some of the questions that were also posed yesterday. I personally wouldn't put it like that one experiences a glimpse and then plays the game of life with that in mind, because I would say that one is never actually playing the game of life, right? The idea that one is playing the game of life is itself a fantasy, of sorts. What happens is glimpses are transformative. Transient glimpses are transformative of the mind to some extent, depending on the particular person. They clearly have an effect. They move the person along their quest, among other things. Actually, it's not really the glimpse itself. The glimpse is really just the candy that's coming from the effort that's been put in. They're kind of a marker of progress, but they aren't themselves necessarily all that critical. What matters is the continuity of the practice over time. That's really what matters. And then realization itself can be seen as a kind of super glimpse, or if you want, something like this. Now, glimpses are basically at the level of the mind in the sense that they are experiences, basically. They're experiences of unity, experiences of peace, experiences of going beyond one's normal self, right? Okay, I used to feel locked in here. Now for a moment or an hour or a day, I feel expansive. I feel free. I feel unburdened. I feel like I'm not doing anything. I feel like everything is perfect and complete. This is a glimpse. Those are mental experiences, and yes, they can be transformative. Realization, whatever that is exactly, whether that's transformative of the mind, it depends on which standpoint we're speaking from. The reality is, again, the content of the realization is there are no standpoints. So, the entire structure of the quest is undermined by the realization. Right? It's only from the standpoint of quote unquote non-realization that there's such a thing as realization, in a way, ironically, and similarly, only from that standpoint, they could then say, oh, well, the mind is transformed. Well, I mean, whose mind is transformed, really? Is there a mind to be transformed? That's the whole question, actually. So we don't want to view realization as just another event in the person's life. I mean, I guess you could view it that way for some people, but it's not really that reflective of the truth. What's the truth? The truth is that realization is that the mind who was seeking realization, or which was seeking realization, is not what it seems to be in the first place. So it doesn't exist in the way that it thinks it does. And so for it to be transformed, transformation assumes that it is what it seems to be in the first place. It may be transformed in the sense that there's a kind of realization that it's fictional. But even then, whose realization is it? There's a paradox here, basically. But I guess my point is, I don't think we should try to think of realization as I have this realization and then I go back out into the world with it. Rather, the realization undermines, in some sense, the idea that there is a world to go back into, or that there ever was a world in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to open it up. Anyone online have any comments or questions so far? Just wait. You have it. Okay, great. I can't hear, unfortunately.
Can I get 1 second? Let me
1 second here. I think there's a volume issue.
audio. Yeah.
Are you unmuted, Chris?
I am.
Oh, there's a vault.
I can
One.
hear.
Okay, now we
Yeah,
can hear
and
you. Now we can hear you.
so-
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That's good or?
Yes.
It's good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
First of all, Akilesh, thank you so much for doing this.
You're very welcome.
I follow every new thing you post, and we met, once face to face a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
It's great. So when I first started practicing self-inquiry with you, I noticed I could not do it in the presence of another person, even if that person was like a mile away. Like I'd be walking my dogs, practicing, and someone would come into view way up ahead, and I'd be like some face had to be suddenly the urge to, present myself, I guess, which I never noticed before, just took over. It's not like that now, which is strange for me. Like I can sit here just with my wife at dinner or anyone, and I can keep the practice going. So clearly there was some attachment there that's weakened or something. What I find now, and I've had a lot of glimpses, just as you described, that often come. I guess they always come after a very intense practice, which is usually on the heels of or in response to some intense suffering, some challenge. Like like everyone, we have various problems, and sometimes just the anxiety gets overwhelming, and I just bring the practice back, that it almost just serves as almost like I could be just intensely focusing on anything. Maybe it would have the same effect, I don't know, but just going back to this practice, and then it flips. It goes from the worst of my life to this crazy clear, like I write it down, I know that it's not going to matter that I wrote it down. When I write down, okay, I'm seeing things how they are right now, and I guess this is what it's like, and it's of no help, later on when I'm struggling again. So I think that's okay. I think I'm going. I think I'm going okay there. Where I am with the actual practice right now. Well, first of all, in terms of my life, things don't matter the way they used to. Yeah, and that was happening a little bit, which is actually what brought me to you in the first place. I was a little panicked about that. Now the questions of, like, as you say, being clear about what you really desire become harder for me to answer. Because for me, I think, in this broadly speaking, one of the big attachments was like a overblown sense of responsibility for everyone and everything in my life, and that is weakening, and it's leaving me with a little bit of, why do I do this and not that?
Well, I mean, look, so that's great. I mean, that's fine. The focus on trying to discern what it is that you actually want is mainly it's mainly a way of integrating the mind, you might say, in preparation for deeper practice, right? So if you're already finding that because of the practice that you've done so far, that you are less and less interested in the world, generally speaking, or interested in various other goals, then perfect. The important point is that you keep the practice going more and more intensely. So yeah, I mean, nothing wrong. That's great. I mean, this is exactly what should happen, right? As you do the practice, other attachments weaken, and they become of less concern. And as long as that's not interfering with the practice, right? You'll know that there's a hidden attachment, like I was saying earlier, if it's interfering with the practice. But if the practice is actually, it sounds like you're saying the practice is happening most intensely on the heels, like you say, of suffering. So, that's good in a way because it's transforming the suffering, absolutely. But, if the more and more continuous you can make it, even when you're not suffering, the better, basically. Because the reality is, it's generally speaking easier to practice when they're suffering because people want to exit suffering, and it's harder to practice when things are going well. I also want to say, right, I think you made a really good point earlier on about how, it was hard for you to do the practice when there were other people around because of, like you say, the desire to present yourself in a certain way to other people. This is a very common issue that people have. because the practice, surrender or inquiry, tends to interfere, or at least we fear anyway, that will interfere with our self-presentation. And so, a lot of us have been, since children, building up a very suave self-presentation, that we project a certain personality, and then we're afraid that'll break down, right? We're viewed as the good son, the good friend, the good husband or wife or whatever it is, right? Good coworker, and we're afraid that those things will break down and people will see, underneath. So, it's important that you notice that, and also important that you notice that it's much weaker now, which is great.
Yeah, it's weaker now in the sense of just being with another person. But the other things you mentioned about the other kinds of identities, like I'm the good father, the good this, the good that, those are interfering with the practice, to be honest, because, there are days when it's like, this is so stupid. and then when I have those glimpses, it's so obvious that there's nothing else. That everything else is what's stupid.
Yeah.
I guess I put it
Yeah. Exactly.
But those glimpses, you kind of can't recall them.
Correct.
Obviously.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Glimpses are not really recollectible, unfortunately. I mean, you only have the shadow or the corpse of them, right? Which is like, oh yeah, it was wonderful, but really, what was it really like? We don't know, because it's like a different mode of mind, It's not accessible from this mode of mind, that mode of mind. It is a mode of mind still, but it's a special mode of mind. So, unfortunately. But, the drive to re-get the glimpses is fine. It's ultimately, glimpses are still transient phenomena, but the fact that you experienced that ecstasy and you want to attain it again, it's fine. It's a carrot, to keep going and push harder and harder.
Yeah, it's not even so much of a carrot for me, as I know what you mean by that, but it's more like a verification.
Yeah.
I just have one specific question, one last specific question.
Sure.
So, in terms of the actual practice, when I'm practicing self-inquiry and getting my focus, I'm an artist, a painter. I paint realistically out of my head, so I'm like super good at making pictures of things that look like what they are. Just a skill that I've just developed. So it's an insane superpower, and it's an insane weapon that gets used against me in my head at the same time. So the particular kind of wall that I hit very quickly is I see my own face. Even though I know I'm not looking at my own face, it's completely a thought. It's so obviously, it's completely imagination. What am I? There's my face. And I don't, so who am I recognizing this face, I guess?
Yeah, exactly.
But it just stays there. Is that something I should just let stay there, that the picture's there? Or?
I mean, so you're saying in your mind, as you do inquiry, the image of your face comes up? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's fine. It's not a problem. See, all kinds of things can come up in inquiry or surrender, and it's not your job to remove them from your awareness. What it is your job to do is to focus your attention on whatever it is that's aware, right? So again, it's like, it is like to use, one of many metaphors, right? If you have a drawing on a piece of paper, right? It's your job to try to focus on the paper, rather than the drawing. You don't have to kick the drawing out of the paper. You don't have to erase the drawing. Just be able to try to focus the paper. I mean, and then as you focus on one piece of paper, you might recognize, oh, well, actually, what I thought was the paper is actually part of the drawing still, and there's actually the real paper is something else that I haven't understood, right? So, and then that paper is also part of the drawing, right? So this drawing is actually this multifaceted, kind of illusion where there seems like there's paper, but that's part of the drawing, that's part of the drawing, that's part of the drawing. Where's the actual paper? It's there somewhere, it's there. So you're hunting for that, basically.
All right, can I just ask one more question?
Sure.
I'm trying to be quick. I think we all have the experience when we first start self-inquiry that the first thing that's apparent is that we look for this I and we don't find it. It's like, oh, it's not there. This thing I thought was there is not there. And in some ways you think, whoa, that should be enough. That should be really dramatic. But is it correct to put it almost I put it almost like this, like you're looking for the tooth fairy, I guess. So you're staying up at night to try to catch the tooth fairy, and you never catch her because your mom is really smart. She keeps sneaking into your room when you're in the bathroom, whatever. You never catch her. So you might kind of think, I guess there isn't a tooth fairy, but you haven't really figured out what is the tooth fairy. But then the time that you catch your mom, like, putting a tooth under there, like, oh, now I see what's happening. And then you can never, like, there's no way you can ever see the tooth fairy. Is it like that?
Okay, I mean, that's a fun metaphor, this idea of the tooth fairy. I don't think it's exactly right, however, because it's first of all, I don't think we can say that the truth is, people think, right, oh, the eye is not there. That's not true, right? You are experiencing, that's the funny thing, right? The tooth fairy is, it's a story that someone says, that it's not actually present in your experience, right? Like you find a coin, you put a tooth under the pillow, and then you find a dollar bill or whatever it is the next day. And the tooth fairy is completely just a story which someone tells you about as an explanation for what's happened. I is not like that. I is something which you are in some sense experiencing right now. The issue is not that it's not there, ever. The issue is, what is it that I know is there? How do I know it's there? I know it's there because I'm aware. So by virtue of my own awareness, I know I am. But what exactly is that awareness? What happens is when you say it's not there, what you really mean is, I can't pinpoint what it is. That's a very fair statement, right? So, it's mystifying that I can simultaneously know that I'm here and also not know how it is that I know that. That's the dilemma. So, so what we're doing is we're insisting that I do know that I am. I do know that I am, and I'm not going to let anyone tell me, or I'm not going to let my inability to pinpoint how I know stop me from finding it out eventually, because it's right there. Like, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling my own existence. This is the most basic, elementary, first principle. Like if you experience anything at all, you experience this fact, which is that you exist. So, but what exactly is that you experience? Like, again, you're touching it, you're tasting it continuously. But how is it the case that though I'm touching it right now, as soon as I actually attend to what it is that I'm touching, now it seems to be remarkably hard to find what it is that I'm touching, even though I'm touching it. Even though in the moment of not being able to find it, even in that very moment I'm touching it by knowing that I'm unable to find it. So, it's really extraordinary how we are seeing something which we take for granted. And the moment we actually try to discern what it is that we've been seeing very continuously, there's been a the moment we try to see what we've been trying to see continuously, it suddenly becomes very hard to actually locate it. Does that make sense?
Yes, so that's what I was describing as we look and it's not there. What you're putting up more clarification on is we know we're experiencing it, then we look and then we find it hard to locate.
Correct, exactly, because you are experiencing it all times. That's right.
It's not there.
It's not there. It's never not there. Yeah. And because the one who's saying it's not there, or the one who's saying I can't find it, is knowing that they are there, seemingly unable to find it. You're aware of the experience of being unable to find. That moment, you're there. But what's there? What is there? That's the question, right? I'm here, but what am I? What is that? What do I mean by that? I certainly mean something. But what do I mean by that? Where is this I, which is clearly right here, right? Like it's like trying to find your own shadow or something like that. It's following you, it's stalking you, right? And yet when you turn to, when you whirl around, it whirls around with you, you know. So this is the problem. But yeah, we can never say it's not there. And so people also make this confusion while we're on this topic, right? They'll be like, yeah, I mean, people will think that they've discovered through this method that I don't exist, because what happens is they equate the I to some collection of personality or psychological attributes, right? They start to realize, which is an important realization, by the way, and it is part of the practice, that, there is a person, and this person is not them, right? There's some sense of that, right? Some sense of that is happening, which is is a critical part of all of this. And they say, oh well, therefore, so I'm detached from that person, or that person is I, and I'm not that. I'm not I. I don't exist because I'm not that person. Not realizing, of course, that the one who's saying that is the one we're looking for, right? So it is important, and the practice does lead to progressive disidentification from the person. But ultimately, we're going to come back down to the issue of the observer. Whoever the observer is, the sense of observership, the sense of experiencership in the first place. It's not just the person that we're dealing with. It's the sense of being an observing entity at all. That sense. What is that sense? That's what it ultimately comes down to. Yeah.
So I didn't, I wasn't there in the beginning.
Sure.
So lots of, like you said, scientists and things like that, research so much. I feel that lots of intense focus
Yes.
you do, and then you really, then after that you are not doing that, but it becomes your natural tendency
Yes.
to be experiencing the silence and be with that kind of. I feel like, for example, they organize Saptaham, 9 days of practice. 8 hours chanting. 8 hours I was completely doing the chanting, okay? And 9 days, and then again 7 days, 8 hours, like that, 8 hours, 6 hours. Get up at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock, and then do up to 9, 11 or 8 or something, and then all those things for continuously many. I feel that I don't even need any method, and then I can be with the silence all the time. And I don't know whether the focus is leading you or intensity for a long time leading you, but there is some connection, I feel.
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, your effort doing many hours of practice, whatever it is definitely going to lead you to a greater degree of easier focus over time. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, not only focus, and then I feel like
a connection with the silence.
Like even my external things and all that do not matter to me, and I can do cooking and still be with that silence like that.
Yes.
And I can be doing this and I can be with the silence. So all these things I feel like the 2 years you do, 3 years you do intensity like this, it becomes natural for you not to be attaching any theory or attaching any guidance or anything of that, and you are in the state and you can feel that completely, and you are aligned with that.
Correct. Silence will come to you more and more,
and also you will experience the silence everywhere, and then also you experience the silence in some places more, and then experience the silence everywhere, and then you experience silence even when you are doing anything and everything. That's a
beautiful way of putting it. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Yeah, I think that's right. Again, I would just caution you, right? I mean, you're basically right. I would just say, right? Push to recognize behind any relative experience of silence, right? That it's still an experience.
Yeah, it's
that's
an
the only
experience.
Thing, right? I would say. But basically, I think your point is that as you put in a great deal of effort, right, the silence comes more and more naturally, right?
Yes.
The mind quiets, and you are able to experience the silence of the mind more automatically in a larger and larger number of situations.
Yes.
Which is true, 100%.
And also I feel it does not matter, now I have come to a conclusion, it does not matter what method you follow, but the key thing is very intense practice you do, and the intensity leads to that thing where you don't even, you effortlessly going into that
so
mode.
Intensity is very important, and intensity basically is a code for concentration, and concentration does lead to silence, basically. So you're right about that. That's like polishing this mirror of mind, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But the difference between surrender and inquiry and other methods, because there is a difference, is that they're not just concentration. There's also an element of discernment, where one is trying to recognize what is this image in this silent mirror. Not just the silence. The silence is very important. There's a story with the Buddha, basically, right? So the Buddha, before he became the Buddha, he wandered through the forest and he met all these ascetics, and he tried many different methods, right? And some of them were powerful in quieting the mind, but they did not lead him to the truth he was looking for. So finally, he sits under the Bodhi tree, and then he does his own particular special method, and he finds the truth, right? And after he finds the truth, he says, I think depending which scripture you're reading, I think he decides to go. Well, initially he thinks, oh, nobody's going to ever understand this, right? But then apparently the gods beg him to be a teacher for the world and all that. And so he says, I'm going to start by teaching, he says, those individuals that I met that had little dust in their eyes. Little dust in their eyes. What does he mean by that? He means that he met certain ascetics who had, through dint of extreme, intense effort, stilled their minds to a considerable extent. That is to say, they had a large degree of silence in their minds. That silence did not in itself mean self-realization.
Right.
Because there's a further degree. What's the degree? The degree is, the silence is like a mirror. It is the mirror. You have to look in the mirror and notice what the mirror is reflecting. It's not just the silence. The silence is very important, but who is aware of the silence?
Okay.
That key point, right? So what the Buddha did is he found those people who had relatively silent minds, and he explained his findings to them. And because their minds were so silent, they almost immediately grasped it.
Yes.
Right? Because they were ripe, basically. So even though they didn't have that little last bit of discernment, they were ready for it because their minds were very silent, their attachments were very few and weak, so they were ready for it. But I just want to make that very clear, right? That's the distinction between surrender / self-inquiry and every other method of concentration. You can come to a quiet mind via many methods, actually. There are many methods of attaining a quiet mind. And a quiet mind is a prerequisite for realization. But there is that extra element of insight, right? This is why the scriptures say, right, there is a matter of hearing, right? Hearing something that points out to you what it is that you're looking at. When you see this extremely subtle silence in the mind, right? There needs to be that just a little extra thing that says, this is that, what is that? What is this silence? Who am I in relationship to it, right? That question has to be discerned. So you see the difference?
Yeah.
So just to be very clear.
Yeah.
So it's not. I can't quite entirely agree that every method is the same that way.
No,
Many methods can lead to silence, but the silence has to be discerned as an image of you.
So part of my mind wants to play a devil's advocate.
Sure.
So, I agree with 99.9%.
Sure. Go ahead, please.
So, just to give an analogy, suppose if you are trying to locate the sun at midnight.
Yeah.
We see the manifestation of the sun. For example, we see the full moon. I know that the moon is reflecting the light of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever inquiry I do to locate the sun at night is, we're just struggling with, intellectually somebody might say, what are you trying to do? Like, you cannot see the sun at night.
Sure.
Just wait for a few hours, let the sun come up and you will see it in its full glory. Are we trying to locate the self during midnight? All we have to do is to just wait for some time and suddenly it will reveal itself?
That's a patience time.
That's the patience idea.
Time.
I don't. I would say that the self will reveal itself in time to those who've been graced with the a desire to put in the effort to find it. It's not just a matter of time. I mean, in a sense, it is. The realities of self is revealing itself all the time. I will say, right, another interesting point here. We're not technically looking for the self with a capital S. We're not technically looking for the grand self. We're not. What we're looking for is the ordinary, mundane, immediate sense of I, which is currently in our experience. So it's the sun that's shining right now. It's not the sun that's hidden. It's the sun that's shining right now. We're like, I'm seeing the light. Where is the light coming from? That's all we're asking. What happens is that the sense of I, the ordinary sense of I, not the grand self, the ordinary waking sense of I, is like it's the boundary, basically. It's the boundary object between our normal individual sense of self and that great grand capital S self. We're not looking for that directly. What we're looking for is the nature of the ordinary I, because that ordinary I is not ordinary at all. It's magic, right? It's like two-faced. It's a two-faced I. On the one hand, on the one side, it's the individual I. On the other side, it's God, basically. So, so we're looking for something which is actually shining right here. Mm-hmm. It's not hidden. It's not like the Tooth Fairy. It's shining. The question is, but as soon as you start looking for what exactly is shining, though I see it now, it's hard to find. And this is strange. It's very strange precisely because of the kind of illusion that it is. You see, it masquerades first as this, then as that. So because it seems like it's a thing. That's what it is. Yeah. It seems like it's a thing, but it's actually a kind of like epiphenomenon or something like that, right? Where it's like like a relationship of things. It seems like it's and the metaphor I've used before sometimes is it's like there's so many metaphors like this, but imagine there's a painting, okay, and and it seems like there's a small white dot in the center of this, okay? It seems like it's a white dot. But as you go very, very close and look very, very closely at this white dot, you actually will notice in the end that it's not a white dot of paint. It is a hole that's been punched, a tiny hole that's been punched in the canvas, through which light is leaking. From a distance, it seems like it's another piece of paint. Very close up, it's something entirely different. It's a tunnel to the light that's behind the canvas. So the eye is somewhat similar. It currently seems as if it's this solid, like, object feeling. Like, I mean, not subject, but the point is, it feels like it's me. It's like it's here. It's like it's this thing that I am. As you examine it very closely, what you'll see is that sense of being this sort of solid person or being or whatever you want to call it, is an illusion that is instantiated by the movement of mind, just like that torch whirling we were talking about yesterday. And when you look for that, the torch gets slower and slower and slower. And eventually it cannot sustain the illusion of the circle anymore. It breaks down, the illusion breaks down. And then it reveals itself to actually be a tunnel into the light. That the waking I, which is the ordinary ego sense of I, is actually nothing other than the self. Huh?
Yes. So yesterday, Akilesh, when you were talking about surrender, you mentioned that the surrender has to be relaxed. You have to do the surrender in a sort of relaxed way. Could you throw? When I was surrendering, I was wondering if I'm being relaxed doing it. So, wondering if you can throw a little bit more light on when I would not be relaxed when surrendering and when is relaxed. And I know that's yet another thought that
no,
has to
that's
be
fine.
surrendered.
That's fine. Ask. No,
but it's more of a, is the relaxation more of a spaciousness that you create when you?
So
what is that really?
So I would clarify. So I wouldn't actually say. How should I put this? Yeah. So really, it's not actually that you need to be relaxed exactly while doing it, because the surrender itself can in fact be an intense effort. It's the intense effort to remain undrawn in by the thoughts that are trying to draw you in, essentially. The relaxation I'm really referring to is mainly the relaxation of the will, right? The sense of doing, and even then, right? Even then, it's a relaxation of the will with respect to everything other than the practice of surrender. So you are this will. What do I mean by will? What I mean by will is the sense of, like, that sense of burdensome effort. That's all I can put. The sense of doing well. So again, I use these terms in very specific ways. So you are feeling the sense of doership is the truth, and you cannot, unfortunately, just give that up. You cannot negate the sense of doership by your own will. Doership is a kind of illusion that can be lifted by grace. What we're trying to do is that sense of doership, which is connected to the will, we're trying to channel it in just one specific channel. That channel is the practice, whereby nothing but the practice gets our will, basically. All other things must happen, if they happen at all, automatically, spontaneously, involuntarily, by themselves. But so really what it's coming down to is the relaxation of this thing we call the will. That's what we're trying to relax through effort. We are effortfully protecting the relaxation of this muscle. Again, it's like, it is like some muscle that, again, like I was using that clenched fist example yesterday, right? Some muscle that we're used to tightening all the time, and we're very, very deliberately watching ourselves to make sure that we don't tighten it, right? So there's effort involved. The effort is involved in watching our fist to make sure we don't clench it, because we're so used to clenching it. That's the effort. But other than that effort, which is the effort of the practice of surrender, other than that effort, no effort.
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't it, can you say yes, like a fear of letting go, and you need to trust something that things will be all right to let go? Or
Yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. Essentially, surrender is a kind of trust, 100%. And it's not reasonable for most people to be able to trust completely immediately. In fact, it's almost impossible. What happens is, as a result of the practice, right, you trust a little bit, you dip your toe into the water a tiny bit, and you survive that, and then you dip it a little bit more and a little bit more. And slowly trust builds up, basically, in the process. But yes, ultimately, it is a matter of trust, because,
in practice, we see that things are happening. Some force is making you do things. You feel it. You know that some force is doing it.
Yeah.
But still, you interfere.
Yeah. Right. Right. Well, because you have this very strong inbuilt conviction that the force is there, but if I don't do it, it won't happen.
Right. Okay.
Which is it's in the verses as well, actually.
And the one who's wondering if that force acting through us also has to be let go, right?
The one who what now?
The one who, when you looks at wonderment when that force operates through you, should also be inquired into.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let go.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, that's exactly
So
inquired
that's
into,
a
you might
thought.
say. Yeah, it's a thought. It's a thought. 100%.
And that's an experience. The force is working through me.
Correct.
It becomes an experience,
Yes.
so you need to inquire into it.
Yes.
So
100%.
Last year after you left, right? We started practicing the surrender more. I'm not the type to surrender. And then that's my nature. Go getter, make it happen, kind of a person. And that's a conflict between us from the beginning. But after you left, you convinced me. All these many years of my conviction. Then I started to really feel that, okay, I'm not doing it, I'm going to watch it. And then very critical things also, very critical decision also. And I'm very keenly observing the players doing it for me. They are making the phone call. Somebody is doing something for me. Somebody is doing that gets triggered. Without my involvement, things are getting, but I am observing all the different players very keenly. And then in the process, what happened? Things got fixed, something then did something. Then I see, okay, I'm starting to appreciate the symphony.
Yes.
And with the rhythm.
Yeah.
The rhythm is there. It's like everybody is put in one rhythm and it's moving.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you do not play any
Yes.
importance, or I'm able to watch, and also that rhythm also makes me get up and do things.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Write something.
That's
or
right.
Go take Swamiji to
Yes.
meditation. That
Yes.
does not 1 minute I say I'm going to observe and I lie down. I'm not getting up.
Yeah.
And then later, like it made me get
Yes.
up
Yes.
and
Yes.
get
And
ready.
before you
5
know it,
minutes,
you're
2
up.
minutes,
That's
3
right.
minutes I got ready. Instead of 10 minutes, I got ready in 2 minutes.
Yep. Yep.
That also happens.
Yes.
So I'm observing that symphony too.
Yes, yes, exactly. You may think you're not going to do something, but
Yeah.
before you know it, it will have seized you and you'll have done it. You know what? If it's meant to be done, you won't be able to stop yourself.
Yeah,
from
and
it,
also
actually.
that I am also a player, I realized.
Yes, 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 yeah, exactly. Beautiful, exactly. That's exactly how it is. That's what it exactly. Exactly. And so the more you observe that, the more trust you'll have that this is in fact the way things are. Because this is in fact the way things are. You know.
Yeah. I thought everything is beautiful.
It is.
So I thought
Well, that's true,
this is
actually.
also like just like observing.
Well, it's beautiful. It is beautiful because this is this is the promise of surrender. This is the promise of realization generally, right? Is to be in the position of the gods, which is pure spectatorship without effort. It's perfect, right? It's all art then, and everything happens effortlessly, right? This is what surrender is saying, right? Just be a feather on the wind. Just be some seaweed which is blown in the ocean, around wherever it goes, totally relaxed. The only effort we're doing is to prevent ourselves from unrelaxing, because we have such profound built-in habits of needing to control, It's only to unwind those habits, basically, that we're doing all these practices, Surrender does it from the standpoint of some degree of faith, and I'm just going to surrender, and inquiry does it from asking, okay, well, who is it that's concerned about these things? Who is it that thinks that certain things need to happen, right? And then as soon as we start looking for ourselves, now we're led into a quandary, because we can't seem to locate what is quite obviously there, but around which our life is built, right? All our commitments are built around this I. Like, I need to do this, I need to do that, my career, my family, this, that, and all the other thing, right? What inquiry is showing us is that we don't actually know the meaning of this word, even though we built our entire lives around it. And as soon as we, even before, the full realization must mean in some sense, knowing who or what you actually are. But even without that, again, just recognizing the profound lack of knowledge is a huge thing, because that we assume that we know who we are. As soon as we see that we don't know who we are, that undermines the center of the attachments, basically, because they're all about me. But who's me? Who is this person, me? So yeah.
So it's kind of negates what my schooling in this so far. I'm Krishna. Right?
Oh, hi.
Yeah, hi. Hari Om. So the word that which you have used is knowledge and ignorance.
You should.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I gotta accept that I'm a persona of knowledge and I am knowledge, rather than telling myself I'm ignorant.
Okay.
And with that knowledge comes everything else, where you talked about Digdrish Vivek is me, what I'm seeing, and the anubhuti is the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And all that comes with knowledge. Isn't it true?
I'm not fully sure I'm grasping what you're saying. So are you suggesting that rather than viewing yourself as ignorant, you should view yourself as knowing?
Knowledge, yes.
As knowledge.
Yeah.
And what would this do for you exactly? How would this help you?
This will help with the self-inquiry and it will help with the surrender. It will help both those aspects, the two paths that which you have talked about.
And how would it do that? I'm curious.
Okay, so surrender is submission,
Uh-huh.
right? So you submit, saying that I'm not going to question this philosophy.
Okay.
I'm not going to challenge any of these aspects.
Mhm.
To these realms I have accepted, right? These are the ideas that which I have accepted, and I'm going to be staying grounded in that.
Okay.
Okay, that's the surrender. And that would, the more and more I do, the more and more acceptance of it and I will become easier.
Okay, sure, but you're still doing the practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see any contradiction, right? The point is, I think you're right on one point, which is that the seeker in a way has to have a little bit of a dual mentality, which is, on the one hand, I'm a seeker. On the other hand, there is some sense that I know that I am that already. If you didn't have that sense, then you wouldn't be seeking on this path, actually. But both sides are required. So if you're doing the practice, you're doing the practice because at some level, in some way, you're a seeker.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means you're implying that in some way and on some level, I'm ignorant. I'm looking to find, right? So you're right that surrender requires, or inquiry requires, both require a certain degree of faith that this road will lead me somewhere worthwhile. In that sense, we can say that I'm accepting these precepts, at least provisionally. And like I said as well, there's that sense of, yes, I'm ultimately that. In fact, even now I'm that. Even now I'm the self. But I'm also seeking simultaneously. It's a paradox, right? Because you have to have both these elements in mind at the same time. What are all these ideas of, I am the self, I am pure consciousness, I am awareness, I am being, I am bliss? Why are all these pieces there? They're actually there to aid in the practice because they are helping someone identify, once the mind comes to that silence, they're helping it identify what's there. It's so subtle, right? What remains is so subtle that it requires someone to, in a way, to point out what is there, quote unquote. So that's why we have all the scriptures that are subtly suggesting in these very, very, basically extremely subtle ways that will ring a bell at the right time, because they're posed like riddles, like what is inside you but also outside you, what is beyond time and space but also here and now, these kinds of riddles are there. They don't actually make any sense if you think about them from a purely philosophical standpoint, but they will make sense if you're experiencing the relevant experience to help you identify what that experience is.
I just wanted to add that
Sure.
When I practice it in inquiry and surrender, almost being in the space of not knowing seems to be more beneficial, because sometimes the knowledge that you go study from the Upanishads or
Yes.
everything else comes as a
Yeah.
labels things quickly. And then you limit yourself by that labeling.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm Brahman,
Yes.
it's a concept, right?
Yes.
So almost being in sort of an innocence, like I don't know anything.
Yes.
I'm just following this practice. I'm in, I don't know.
Yes.
That seems to create a spaciousness.
Yes, you're absolutely right, 100%.
That innocence.
Yes.
Sometimes I have to bring that innocence consciously because concepts rush in and, try
Yes.
to language everything. Right?
Yes. In fact, it's mentioned.
I like the word innocence versus ignorance.
Yeah, yes.
I feel like I feel like I'm compelled by what you just said. I'm going to skip a bunch of. Well, I'll come back to the more orderly exposition of the verses later. But I do want to. I'll mention it because I think it's relevant to what you just said, which is where is this here? Verse 34 in Ulladanarpada Anubandham says, "For unlearned folks, there's only one family consisting of wife, children, and dependents. But in the mind of those with much learning, there are many families of books, theories, and opinions as obstacles to yoga."
Yes.
So Maharishi says this exactly. This is 100% right. So and he says in the next verse, he says, actually I'll read the next two verses. They're all relevant. He says, "What is the use of letters to those lettered folk who do not seek to wipe out the letters of fate by inquiring whence are we born? What else are they but gramophones, O Lord of Arunachala? They learn and repeat words without realizing their meaning. And the unlettered are easier saved than those who are learned but unsubdued. The unlettered are free from the clutches of demon pride. They are free from the malady of many whirling thoughts and words. They are free from the mad pursuit of wealth. They are free from many, many ills." But the point being that you're absolutely right. So the scriptures and the theories of Vedanta and so on can be extremely helpful in constructing a certain like support for pursuing the practice. But you're absolutely right, then they can then become blinders to what is actually there. And that's why, Ramana said, there's no point in just repeating to ourselves over and over mechanically, like I am Brahma and I am the self over and over again. That can be helpful at a certain point in time maybe, but the point is beyond that, the point is not to just tell ourselves that we're some concept. We're not a concept is the truth. None of the concepts are accurate. None of the concepts are accurate. Even Advaita itself is just a concept, Advaita is true, Dvaita is in some sense true, both are false, both are incomplete. There's an issue, with concepts, period. And we're trying to get beyond the concepts. The concepts themselves are constructed to get you beyond concepts in some sense.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah, sure.
Because I've noticed this with me that, like, Advaita as like an intellectual theory or something, as an intellectual philosophy, can very easily be interpreted by the mind as what we would call nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates a lot of fear, to be honest. If you say, when I'm having a glimpse, and I use the phrase nothing really matters, it's kind of beautiful. But
Mm-hmm.
if I go to my kid that or something, it sounds, not nihilistic, like what's the point of it living, kind of. It's very dark, and I understand that's just intellectual. That's how the mind all the mind can get out of it, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, and that's why it's so important to actually do the practice, because the self is not empty and meaningless. It's actually full and perfect. And so a kind of philosophy which leads to a gray wasteland is inaccurate. But you're absolutely right that if you just looked at the philosophy of Advaita from a purely philosophical standpoint without any actual practice attached to it, you could be led in that direction, But the reality is, right, people might say, well, yeah, all these sorts of questions, right? Yeah, I mean, if Advaita is true, then why be a good person, for example, right? But the reality is you assume that you're in charge of whether you're a good person or not. Are you in fact in charge of that? The answer is no. So, why should I go to work in the morning? Well, again, is that something you're in control of? You think you're in control, but are you? And then, is there such a thing as work? Is there such a thing as morning? Is there such a thing as now? Who is making all these ideas, actually? I am. Who am I? Well, that's a mystery now. So, everything really roots back down to this I thing, actually, is a fact. But yeah, so that's why it's so important. These philosophies are not just, Advaita is not just a philosophy. Advaita is a support for a inward looking. That's what it's all about. Yeah. Other questions so far? So let's do some practice together for a bit, shall we? Let's I think that'll be good. So let's do 10 minutes of self-inquiry. Let's do that. Let's start with that. And then we will discuss. All right. Here goes 10 minutes of self-inquiry. All right. Anyone want to share their experiences?
I would say I used to follow, what Upadeshi Saram says, a couple of slogans always catches me. One is Ulladu Unaru Unarvu Verille. So Ulladu Unarva. So what is there is only the feeling. Another one is Tana Irittale Tanna Eridalal. That means Tanmaya Nishta, you will say. So that means be yourself as Tan, be I. That is the nish, you will go into that trance. That's I don't know the Sanskrit version I can find out. The Tamil version of. So you fall asleep also. Today I almost fell asleep when I was coming up. That I can understand if I go that route. It helps me more zoom into the I. Is that correct?
So and the route you're talking about is kind of through the feeling in particular? Yes, I mean, of course, absolutely. I mean, I, in a sense, is a feeling. It's not exactly a feeling, but it's sort of, you can argue that it's there is a sort of feeling to it. You're following a feeling. The feeling is not a standard feeling.
Right, correct.
It's a very unusual
you cannot feel it. It's beyond the five senses.
That's correct.
It's a different feeling.
Precisely. So what this feeling, quote unquote, feeling is itself the object of inquiry. Because you try to feel it. As you try to feel it, what you notice over time is that the feeling that you thought was it is not the feeling of it. Some other feeling is it. That makes sense. But yeah, sure, absolutely, you are following a feeling. You are. It's just that it's not a feeling that fits into any of the standard categories. And it's also interesting. Anyway, I'll just say that you mentioned almost falling asleep because in various scriptures, and Maharishi himself talks about this, right? But I was going to mention actually, I think it's the Mandukya Upanishad, right? The Mandukya Upanishad is there, and there's a very famous commentary on it by Gaudapada, who is Shankara's teacher's teacher, right? Where he lays out essentially surrender. He lays out surrender as a path of coming to the self. And he says, at a certain point, you have to, I don't know if he says it exactly this way, but essentially that when one comes to the very subtle levels of the mind, right, there could be a pull towards sleep, but we don't want to go that direction, basically. So sleep is another thought. Yeah.
I used to go to sleep when 20 years ago when I started doing this, I used to go to sleep right away. As soon as I wake up, I sleep. So but nowadays I don't sleep. At least I don't sleep as
That's good. That's good.
But still you can go to sleep.
Sure.
Best technique to go to sleep.
It is.
Find out, then you'll sleep.
It's true. I mean, honestly, if you go to sleep sometimes, you take a nap. It's not the worst thing in the world. Nothing's gonna happen. But yeah, exactly. I mean, and Maharishi also says this in his sort of, he has this sort of famous these famous passages about Laya, where he says the mind can go to essentially what is a kind of form of meditative sleep. And this meditative sleep, though it is a very quiet mind, in fact, should not be mistaken for the self, right?
Okay.
It's another thought, basically, because he says one can be sitting down in, Nirvikalpa Samadhi with their eyes closed for 1,000 years, right prior to that they may be thirsty for a glass of water. Immediately upon awakening from this trance, again they'll want the water, right? So the mind has not been killed in the meantime. He's had 1,000 years of peace.
Yeah, say that
know.
for Markandeya, right? Before, like Markandeya wanted to see the Pralaya. Then he was taken he's in a deep samadhi, and he's then he was taken through all the Pralaya, everything going, and then emerged into water. Then everything is shown, and then finally he was brought back to his cart, where he again goes back to the stage of meditation.
Right, he goes to all the worlds and comes right back.
And then
right?
like Vishnu, he shows the entire, like he's the alone one person living. Everything submerged, and then like a world comes to like a water, and then everything submerged, everything is unlearned, everything is learned and all unlearned, everything goes off. And then he alone was swept through everything, and then come back, and then he's going, and then he comes back, and he's still in that hut where he was meditating.
Yes.
And then he thinks that he's still in the same stage.
Yes,
That's a kind
yes,
of
yes,
thing.
exactly. So in the same way, precisely, right? You can go to infinite universes and come right back, or you can go into the depths of samadhi and come right back.
And then you said it's not samadhi.
Correct, it's not. Samadhi is, you might say, well, depends on what we mean by samadhi, I suppose, right? So Maharishi distinguishes between, there's the samadhi as a state versus samadhi as the truth.
Sahaja samadhi.
The sahaja samadhi, exactly, the natural samadhi, right? Because the samadhi as a state is like a glimpse, right? Where you enter the state of profound completeness, right? That state comes and goes. That state is nevertheless useful because in that state, one can then is in a position to ask who is experiencing the samadhi, right? And then the revelation will be that the samadhi as a state is a mere reflection of the samadhi that is ongoing all the time. That is, we are continuously, involuntarily, whether we like it or not, always in samadhi.
Yeah.
There's nothing but samadhi, actually. So, So that's.
I felt, I thought it's a deeper feeling, and I thought the deeper silence, and then I said deeper silence. Then the feeling is not from my heart, and it's go further, way deeper, and it's not even that. And then I'm able to observe the silence, and then he said it's not even the silence, because the silence are already existing, and I'm able to observe in certain places or certain stages or with certain people.
Yes.
But then I am able to observe more because I am tuning towards that, and then I feel it. And the feeling is already there, existence. It's not anything that I feel. It's not the feeling at all. The silence exists. It's not.
Well, so silence is there, but the question is who's aware of it, right? The feeling of you, right? Where is that feeling? So you're proceeding correctly. You need to keep going, right? Because the sense of I'm here observing the silence, right? That when the silence is there, it's very hard sometimes to keep noticing that you're here too.
Yeah.
It's not just the silence. You plus the silence. So where's the you part of it?
Yeah, and then I feel that I merged with that. That's a kind of a feeling.
Right. But the one who feels they merged with it, where's that one? See,
I mean is it like I feel okay. First I thought I am feeling it in my stomach. I am feeling it in my heart. And then no, I'm hearing and I'm observing the nature sound. And I am feeling all the nature sound. And then I am silent. And then why the nature, the river is making noise and I am observing that, right? That's all coming. And then I'm deeper and I am feeling. Then finally I'm feeling that I am also part of that kind of a feeling.
Sure. That's also a feeling, right? So again, the I who feels that merger, right? That I'm part of everything. Like that's a feeling that's occurring to you.
Yes.
Another way of looking at this question of inquiry is, where are you situated? Like, where is your seat? Where are you sitting? When we look at a landscape, right, we're sitting somewhere. There's a certain place we're located. We can't look at the river from all the angles at the same time. We're looking at it from a certain angle. So another way of looking at this question is, if all of this experience is like a view, we're viewing this, where are we sitting right now?
I'm out of everything, kind of a feeling. Because beginning I thought I am, inside I feel, just like any feeling. Somebody left, you cry, and then you feel in the heart.
Yes.
And the similar kind of feeling I felt about the silence. Then I thought, no, it's not here at all. And it goes off, and an intense feeling comes, right?
Yes.
Intense feeling is not even inside my body, kind of.
And so again, that feeling again, you should notice, that's also something which you're viewing. You see that?
Yeah.
You're viewing that, even that intense feeling, even that sense of I'm outside it, is also a feeling.
Yeah.
So that can't be you either.
Yeah. And then I thought, okay, I am not there also. Then I said I am aligned, kind of. That's a kind of.
Right, and then that's another feeling. Again,
another feeling.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you keep going like that.
Yeah.
You see, a sense of alignment, sense of merger, sense of completeness, sense of being out of it. These are all senses. So all of these feelings have to be recognized as series of objects. And to keep, I'm still here somewhere, somehow. not captured. This is why you have there's like a riddle of what is it, Prahlada and Hiranyakashipu, right? Hiranyakashipu is a demon who has this like ability not to be killed. There's all kinds of restrictions, right? You cannot be killed indoors or outdoors. You cannot be killed by bird or beast. You cannot be killed by man or woman, right? You cannot be killed by this or that, right? He has all these powers. It's like the ego, actually, in a way, right? Because it can't be categorized as this or that. It cannot be categorized as this or that, right? What you are neither inside nor outside. You're neither in this feeling nor in that feeling. You're neither in the body nor out of the body. You're neither the feeling of being merged nor the feeling of being separate.
Yes, correct.
And yet you are. We cannot just say we can't find it. You are somehow knowing that you're there, aware of all of this stuff. So where? So you have to keep chasing. You see that?
Yeah, correct.
Keep chasing.
So
Keep
that's
chasing.
your
You're
step.
still there.
Yeah.
All of these merger experiences, all of these blissful experiences are still just objects.
Yeah.
That's the key point. So where are you? So where are you? This is the question, right? And in the end, right, again, to use the myth, right? Hiranyakashipu is the demon king, and his son is the devout Prahlada, and Hiranyakashipu doesn't believe in God. Essentially, he's like, where is God, right? And he says, isn't this pillar, right? And he hits the pillar, and out of the pillar comes Narasimha, who's one of the avatars of Vishnu. And again, it's funny, right? Because the point being, in this case, Vishnu representing the self is everywhere. Everywhere. There's a paradox because the self is everywhere, nowhere, and also in something very specific, like a pillar, right? It's like the combination of universality and exact specificity. So it's kind of mind blowing, really, is the truth. But again and again and again and again as you pursue it, like you just said, from the heart, from the stomach into the heart, into various conceptions, that the I that you're hunting is becoming subtler, basically.
Yes.
And your job is not to stop until total clarity about what you are is there.
Right. Every time you get a lot of clarity, that is there.
But I would say is total clarity. So
Yeah.
you're the don't stop, as I'm trying to say.
No.
Along the chain, right? Anything that's happening, you have to keep considering the experience, and keep hunting because anytime you stop at anything which has a beginning and an end, anything with a beginning and an end is an object. Any experience which has a beginning and an end is an object, and we're looking for something which is not an object.
So I really like the example you gave of the vantage point from which you see something creates your experience. It reminds me of perspective creates perception. I think that's a statement like that.
Yes.
So it reminds me of practice that is given in the Yoga Sutras. So I just want your opinion on it and whether it is in alignment with the self-inquiry.
Sure.
So he gives a practice called Vishesha Darshanam. That is the vantage point with which you see things in life or experience life. When you keep shifting that vantage point, the perspective changes.
Yeah.
And you choose that perspective which creates the highest, the most blissful experience. And that perspective will always be the perspective of the divine. That's how it is said in the Yoga Sutras.
Okay.
So the analogy they give is that from the vantage point of the sun, there is no shadow. The sun can never see a shadow. So are we trying to change our perspective? Is that self-inquiry?
So it's a little bit different, I would say. So you're describing the method in Yoga Sutras, which, as I understand it, is about picking a certain kind of attitude into different situations, right? In this situation, what attitude will give me the greatest joy, right? And choose that attitude. And he suggested the attitude of the divine is always going to be that attitude, the standpoint of the divine. That is, more, I would say, on the psychological level, right? Where one is trying to organize one's attitudes, one's beliefs, and one's stances towards life as an individual. What we're doing in self-inquiry is a bit different. We're not actually looking for a different kind of attitude. What we're looking for is, when I say vantage point, I mean I don't mean an attitude. I mean the sense that you have that you are present somewhere as a spectator to all of this stuff. Like all these sense events, all these thoughts, all these emotions, right? Like this is like a movie occurring to you, right? If it's a movie, quote unquote, then there would be a theater and you'd be sitting in some seat, right? Where's the seat?
So that's still a vantage point.
That's a kind of vantage point. We're looking, analogously, right? Like you must be somewhere. But the thing is that, this is not just a movie because again, unlike a movie is purely visual and audio, right? This is more than that. This is like virtual reality where all the senses are part of the movie. All the thoughts, all the emotions are part of the movie. So we can't be located in the movie, but we must be located somewhere, quote unquote.
This is the ghost outside the body.
You could argue that. That's right. Well, yes, but that's a concept, right? So we don't want to just say it's a ghost outside the body. We could say it briefly, but rather to recognize that we have some sense. We have some sense of ourselves, and it's not in any of this.
Correct.
But so where is it then, is the question. So because we can feel it. We can feel us. An analogy I've given, in the past, some people, which I think could be a way of looking at this, and I maybe even said it last year, I can't remember. So you have to forgive me if I'm repeating myself. But it's like this. So it's kind of a funny metaphor. So imagine, have we talked about this aquarium with any of you? I don't know. So imagine there's an aquarium, okay, like a home aquarium, okay? And you have your face pressed against the glass of this aquarium, okay? And in this aquarium, there's some fish, there's some rocks, there's some plants, okay? And suppose, because this is a weird fantasy story, that you have forgotten that you're standing here looking through this aquarium. Instead, all you see is what's inside the aquarium, okay? And now someone says, okay, find where you are, right? And you start looking in the aquarium, okay? You're like, well, am I this rock? You're like, no, I'm aware of the rock. That can't be me. Am I this fish? No, I'm aware of the fish. That can't be me. Am I this plant? No, I'm aware of the plant. That can't be me, right? You're looking all around the aquarium at all the different things in the aquarium, and you're not finding yourself. Now, however, despite that fact, right, you're like, oh, okay, I'm not the rock, I'm not the fish, I'm not the plant, I'm not, I'm not this or that, I'm not even the water, right? None of these things are me. I'm aware of them all. But mixed with all of these different perceptions, there is something common which goes across the perceptions. You follow that, okay, that sensation, you're like, oh, there is something in common between these different things, and you try to focus on that, right? And when you do that, what you are, in our analogy anyway, it's not precisely the same self-inquiry, but it's along the same lines. You're going to be following, let's say, the common feeling of the body, right? Because your body sense is mixed with your visual perceptions of all these things in the aquarium. So you're abstracting out the particular pieces in the aquarium, and you're saying, well, what's in common? Apart from these pieces, what else is left? Well, there's some other feeling is there. So I'm going to follow that feeling out, and maybe the first thing you see is there's glass. You notice the glass, right? This glass, you could view that as this is the magical eye object, right? It's the division between the subject and the object. Perhaps we could call it that. And then eventually you're like, oh my God, I'm standing here on the other side of the aquarium, right? So this is essentially the path that's going, right? You're following this subtle common factor. There's a common experiential factor. As long as you're looking in the aquarium, you're never going to find yourself. But by looking in the aquarium, you're finally going to see, well, there's something that is there, but it's not in the aquarium, but it's there as an experience. And if I just focus my attention on that, eventually it's going to occur to me that there's actually, there's something else. There's some other facet of looking at this, which is namely that There's the body sense, which is not the visual sense, and it's standing outside the aquarium. It's not in the aquarium, but it's mixed with the objects of the aquarium. It's mixed. Similarly, the eye, it's mixed with all the objects of experience. We're trying to say, okay, there's all these objects of experience in the body, in the heart, through silence, blah, 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 right? None of these objects are it, but mixed with them equally is some eye sense. Can we kind of focus on just that piece and follow it wherever it is and go outside the aquarium, quote unquote, wherever that is, basically.
So, well, again, this is a practice-related question. So while I was doing the inquiry and I found myself led towards who am I rather than where am I.
Sure, okay.
And the who am I would end in just being in sort of a void of not knowing. I tried to position myself into the voice of sort of not knowing and just waiting for the answer. Is that okay? Versus, because where am I found myself sort of becoming a little mechanical, because I was saying, okay, I'm here, who knows I'm here, and then the same thing, right?
Sure.
The feeling keeps coming and I was looping.
Sure.
So is this better for me if I
That's fine.
create more spaciousness?
Yeah, that's fine. You don't have to do where am I. You can do who am I. I mean,
Okay.
it's totally up to you. I would just say, right, if you are doing who am I, right, that's great. It's just how should I put this? Try to reorient yourself, every so often, and notice, for example, that in this void that you're looking at, or in the void of not knowing, that that you're there observing this, right? So it's still try to put effort into turning your attention towards it somehow. That's the key point, right?
Yes.
So, it's not wrong. I mean, these are all these different methods that are slightly variations of each other, right? So just asking and waiting, right? It's not so wrong. But I like the idea of trying to orient towards that element in your experience, because after all, it is in your experience, right? So, we're not talking about something which you're not experiencing. You're experiencing yourself. We're not talking about the grand self. The experience of yourself, which is current, is here. So as again my favorite Zen monk Hakuin says, break your head against this koan. You have to break your head against it, because there's no other way. In the process of slamming into the wall, you will break your head, and that's what we want. We want you to break your head open so you can see. Yeah.
Okay.
So when I practiced self-inquiry this time, what I noticed was what was throwing me out of that inquiry was my to-do list. That came up, and then I tried to practice surrender there and said, well, at least I don't have to do it now. So let go.
Sure.
I couldn't practice surrender of, hey, I don't have to do it at all, but at least I could get to the point where you don't have to do it now, so let go. And that kind of, I think, quietened my mind. So I was lost for a minute because I didn't know what was happening, because I wasn't doing self-inquiry. But I don't know if it was sleep, but I was lost definitely.
Sure.
Till I snapped out of it.
Sure.
Wow, you're supposed to do self-inquiry. What are you doing? And then went back into it. So that was my experience this time.
Very, very interesting. I mean, you probably fell into a temporary spell of silence.
Yes.
Essentially.
It's a samadhi.
So, it's exactly, and so, you're talking about attachments. You can see right now that's a set of attachments.
Yes.
Clearly,
Yes.
It's great to pay attention to that, and also you're illustrating very well how mixing self-inquiry and surrender can be really helpful sometimes. Because you were talking about how you're kind of like a go-getter kind of person. Surrender doesn't come naturally to you, right? Or you didn't think it did anyway. But in my experience, it can be really helpful. Self-inquiry gives you the sense of like, I'm chasing something, I'm on a quest.
She hates surrender, actually.
She hates surrender. I mean, it's funny, but sometimes you chase, right? You chase and you will run into the wall. I mean, this is the wall, 100%. You run into the wall, no question. you may get tired at a certain point, and then surrender is very sweet under those circumstances.
No, I don't have a surrender. Like I'll tell you, I do my 400% and then I surrender.
Yeah, exactly.
That is me.
Yeah, that's
and
fine.
After that, I say I did whatever I can do, and to my best of my knowledge, I won't regret later.
Yes.
That's my attitude, and afterwards, leave it to God.
Exactly.
This is what my philosophy.
Yes, no, exactly. So I mean, and so you both sort of illustrate that. I think.
For me also, because it's like do. I think
So inquiry
surrender is
harder.
Inquiry at least quietens my mind.
Yes.
Surrender actually makes my mind more busy. Somehow. I mean, I have to practice. It's like too early for me to.
No, it's okay.
No, it's something I have to practice and see how it feels.
Sure.
But you opened our eyes. Last time you opened our eyes.
Too early.
And different people respond differently. But it's interesting, right? Because some people will, when doing self-inquiry, they will tangle themselves into conceptual knots, right? And it's very, under certain circumstances, because they're trying so hard to get the right answer. And I mean, there isn't, don't get me wrong, there is a big riddle element to self-inquiry, and there is a wall. But for example, for certain people, sometimes I'll talk to them, and it's very clear that they are tripping over their own feet continuously in self-inquiry. And for them, I'll say, try surrender, because it becomes this intellectual kind of like they twist themselves into an intellectual pretzel.
Speed breaks.
Sorry.
Speed breaks.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah, exactly. So so for them.
Could you give some examples, a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think what happens is some people intuitively kind of eventually get what I say when I say you're looking for this experiential component. This thing you're experiencing yourself all the time, right? But for some people, it might be difficult to say, well, they might say, well, am I really experiencing myself? It will become, I mean, and in a way they have a certain kind of point, is the truth. But I think what happens is sometimes they have, these are often people who have read a lot of philosophy and not just necessarily Vedanta, but other kinds of things, and the words themselves are just completely tripping them up. They're unable to actually pursue the experience. They're unable to take it on faith. There is an experience of I in the first place to pursue, and so beyond a certain point of that, it becomes clear that the very phraseology of inquiry is just proving tricky for them to agree with. In which case, okay, fine, just do surrender, because it's just less conceptual stuff involved there. That makes sense. It's not really a problem. It's not really a problem for most people who are pursuing it. It's a problem for some people who find that they can't.
I think they surrender deeper trust and then observe. Keen observation.
Yeah, sure, exactly.
That keen observation, you feel the beauty.
Yes, because you're continuously, the keen observation being that you're continuously pulling your attention away from the experience, basically. By recognizing it as an experience, you're not permitting yourself to actually fall into it. And in that sense, you're observing it, and then you're seeing the beauty of it.
Yeah, it's a high intense observation.
Yes.
That's what I feel.
Yeah.
More than surrender, like what I mean is a surrender for me, I feel. So you observe the harmony of things, how your digestive system, everything works together, or the whole body works together without you, and likewise the whole planetary position, they are not drifting apart, so like that, all your analogy to the things happening around you for you, and they're all without drifting apart, and then observe that then surrender naturally comes, I feel.
Yeah, that's a good addition to it. So I mean, you're talking about sort of trying to see how everything works without you, and using that to help bolster your faith.
Yeah,
right?
Without you, and then also no urge for you to do anything. The things will do. Things will go in rhythm, and you cannot break the rhythm and
That's
go
right.
off.
That's right. But we should be careful, right? Because the rhythm may it may lead to things going in ways which we like, and sometimes it may lead to things going ways which we don't like, right? So whatever way it goes is the way it will go, right? So yes, there is a universal harmony, it's true, but we shouldn't, because I think some people will have this idea, which I don't think is quite true, that when you surrender, and everything will go well. I mean, you should be careful about that.
Yeah.
You know, it may not go well in
That's
the
not-
usual sense.
Yeah.
It may or may not. It may or may not. You know, however it goes is however it goes. The point being that however it goes, whether it's good or bad, there is still a perfection that you are. In fact, that's the point. You know, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant really whether things go well or poorly. We want liberation from that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's a good subtle point, because sometimes when you say, "Oh, everything's going perfectly when I surrender,"
That's right.
need not be the case.
Yeah,
It need not be the
Because
case.
it's not surrender if you had that expectation.
Exactly. I mean, things are going perfectly. It's just that perfectly may not be what you expect.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last time you said I'm thinking of surrender as a weakening mechanism for your other things. That's all.
A weakening mechanism for other attachments.
The attachment other than your alignment with self. No.
Yes. Well, and your alignment with self really is, what is alignment with self? Alignment with self is simply this. This is what surrender is: non-alignment with anything else.
Yes, correct.
Right? There's no self per se. There's no self. Self is not an object that can be aligned with directly. Alignment with self means non-alignment with any other particular thing.
Yeah.
Non-grasping equals alignment with the self. Self is not something separate which can be aligned with. It's non-alignment with other things.
Yeah. So maybe surrender helps you to weaken everything else.
Yeah, true.
Which is not
Yes,
necessary.
correct.
So whatever I try, it's not going to work. Do not worry. Like
Yes,
that.
yeah, exactly. And even
Kind of
also, I'll extend it, right?
Yeah.
Even if you do worry,
Yeah.
not to worry about your worry in
Yeah.
a sense, right? Not to react to your worry, because mental events, emotional events should be viewed as external events, just like a storm outside. Like if there was a storm outside, in the same way, your own emotional events are just like another storm. And so it's not a problem. It's not a problem if you're anxious or angry or depressed per se. I mean, it can be helpful ultimately for the practice if you can deal with these for certain other reasons. But from the pure surrender standpoint, your job is not to judge or eliminate all negative emotions. Negative emotions are not the problem. Your belief that you are the negative emotions, that's the problem. They can be there. They're just like colors. It's like red.
Yeah.
So what?
Coexist.
So what if the anger is there? So what if you're depressed or anxious? You know, you have scriptural stories about these things, right? Again, about enlightened beings, quote unquote, who experience these highly negative emotions. You know, a good example is, Vashishta, of the Yoga Vashishta, is there's an episode in the Mahabharata, I think, where he has like 100 sons, and actually 101 actually. 100 of them are killed by this demon, you know, and he gets really depressed, you know, and he gets depressed and he actually tries to kill himself several times. He tries to throw himself into a river, he tries to burn himself in a fire, and it's said, you know, because of his intense penance, the water refuses to drown him, the fire will not burn him, you know, they're all afraid of him, you know, so like, they won't touch him actually. But, you know, the point is he's depressed, you know, and if Vashishta can become depressed, then anybody can become depressed, right? The point is that's not the measure of the spiritual ultimately. He's above that. Despite the fact that his mind is reacting in this way, it does not mean that he is in fact conditioned by it. So, you know, we shouldn't think that that's the measure.
That's true.
So I think this 10 minutes have given me a lot of bliss, which is very interesting, because the last 3 days, lots of things are going on in the family. My mother-in-law is in ICU.
Oh,
In
sorry.
this state, I think I was in
Menlo
my
Park
thoughts.
is located in California.
And the thought that was, I was with her in the ICU, holding her hand. And you were saying detachment, surrender and all that. This actually got me more closer to an attachment. Because that is what I'm seeking. but the last 3 days I could not picture her. But now I could picture myself there holding her hand. And that calmed me, I think.
It's interesting. So I think in the quietness that was established through the practice, something arose in you that connected you with her, perhaps.
I went to the Where Am I thing and I said address, Gita's house, with the teacher, with satsang. Said, then the next thought came, the to-do list, right? And then what is really overwhelming right now is this thought of not being able to be with her. Sorry, let's go on.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Some of these glimpses, how do you get it back? Is it possible to get it back?
You can never. So what I would say about glimpses is never try to recapture them. You know, what you have to do is you have to travel the same road that you traveled again, right? And because if you try to recapture a glimpse, now you're trying to recreate a memory. That will never be the same thing as the actual thing. What you actually want is to, through inquiry or surrender, thread the needle through these thoughts, and at a certain point, the glimpse will come and take you. If you want to get back there, that's the only way.
Possible, right?
Well, no. You will get back there, but you won't get back. You won't get back to your memory. You'll get back to the actual thing. So if you want to get back to the glimpse, don't try to get back to that particular glimpse. Go on the road of practice again.
That happened without any practice. All of a sudden it happened.
Sometimes it can happen that way. I mean, that may be because of your prior karma or something like that, or it can happen by grace. But in as much as what you can do about it, practice is the road to it for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Because what is a glimpse? A glimpse is the usual illusion of self is temporarily breaking down.
It's not a hallucination.
Well, it may be a little bit of hallucination actually. No, it's true because what happens is, when the usual I illusion breaks a bit, I could call it, like I did earlier, a special mode of mind. You can call it a form of samadhi, and you can also call it a kind of psychedelic experience.
What's the typical duration of this type of
it could be totally. There's no typical duration. It could be minutes. It could be days. It could be years.
Yeah, it lasted for me 24 hours.
Yeah, it could. Of course, it could.
That's why it was unusual for me. That never happened again.
Yeah. Well, look, if you want that, you have to just make the practice. Just make the practice more intense. That's what it is. The practice will lead you back to the glimpses for sure. That's the only reliable way. Beyond that, it's grace, and there's nothing else that can be said of it. Maybe your prior karma in some sense, but the point is the glimpse is that it's because of that the breakdown in the normal workings of the eye. It breaks in a certain fashion. You get a glimpse. Yeah, which is why again, when you say hallucination, yes, there's a connection because it's all like LSD and things like that. They also create temporary breakdowns of the usual eye working, and so that's why you get people who talk about, I had this sublime experience of the divine while taking magic mushrooms or something like that. That's not enlightenment, but that is a kind of glimpsey moment because it affected chemically, but it doesn't really bring anything more than that essentially.
But it's a valid technique, if you would, right? I think Sri Ram, even the Yoga Sutras mentions it, right?
It's valid. Sure, it's a valid technique for a glimpse.
People have tried it with Ramana devotees. Or some of them have tried.
To take
Ramana strictly discourages them.
It's not a shortcut to the self. It's just a glimpse. Where it could help is where I think people who were very, very, very stuck in an extremely materialist mindset, where they don't really have any sense of a connection to the divine or anything beyond the visible, essentially. For them, sometimes taking these drugs will open their eyes and they make them feel like, there is something else. But yeah, it's certainly not a shortcut because people have all kinds of insane ideas that, I can just take LSD millions of times and it's like, that's a shortcut to the self, and it's not.
I have a question on that. So, I find a lot of correlation between highly creative people and people who indulge in such things. So, I mean, my theory, I don't know how valid it is, but I just want to posit.
Sure.
Is it helps them to let go.
Yeah.
So they are able to go to a deeper space of relaxation.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that only people who have done a lot of sadhana or some concentration practice can get benefited by
this
these,
that is,
and it allows them to relax more. It's the concentration and then let go part. It helps with the let go.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I'm sure that's true. I mean, that's right. That's why you have a long history, exactly, of creative people using these things, and maybe it does help them under certain circumstances.
As a highly creative person, I can tell you we're not all like that. I don't. Yeah, it's. I think there are other struggles. It's almost actually the opposite when you're a highly creative person. Is kind of a open floodgate to your subconscious, which you're almost encouraging, and that can be extremely difficult to know what to do with and to process. And while I know a lot of my peers and coworkers and colleagues, it leads them to seek relief
from that flood. That's a really good point.
I see.
Does not help them create. They don't need that to create. It's a little bit of the opposite.
They already have too much coming, basically. Yeah, that's interesting.
But they say like high intelligence, good conditioned mind would definitely understand this also, right? I mean, right? Even for the like Veda to understand high intelligence is highly associated with
Sure, absolutely.
What Raj mentioned, like the Yoga Sutra where Patanjali quotes that, he gives that as one option.
Yeah.
But there are other things.
Yes.
Janma, Aushadhi, Mantra, Tapas, Samadhi, Siddhaya. There are many options.
Yeah.
That Aushadhi, the drugs, is just one option.
One option among many, right? Yeah. No, I'm sure, you can never say never. I think in certain circumstances, for certain people, it might have certain useful effects. Like for example, I've talked about therapy, and I do feel like maybe sometimes for some people, in certain circumstances, drugs can have a therapeutic kind of effect. But no generalizations.
So if I can ask you a question about, again, the preparatory work that needs to be done before you can get to a quiescent mind to do the inquiry.
Yes.
So then the yamas and niyamas of Yoga Sutras and and the Shat Sampati of Vedanta are techniques where you practice internal restraints, external restraints, self-discipline. Now, if you go to pure self-inquiry, there could be a certain danger, like, I can have a glass of wine if I inquire how I feel with a glass of wine, right? So there is that thing that goes in. So how important are these practices to self-inquiry? Because jumping into self-inquiry may lull you into thinking you don't need some of the other disciplines. Is it true, or do you?
Well, the way I see it is,
or does a discipline automatically manifest itself?
Yeah, I mean, I have different views on this than maybe the tradition in certain ways. So first of all, if you are inquiring, then it is in fact the case that whatever happens, happens. So
Sure.
I don't think we should say, you shouldn't have a glass of wine. That's wrong in advance, right? Why do we say no alcohol? Ultimately, it's for the purpose of facilitating the inquiry.
Sure.
That's the only reason, really. If you are inquiring, then you may indeed inquire, who is it that says I shouldn't? Who is it that says that I do want it, right? Either way, the point is you're looking at the eyes. So this idea that inquiry will lull you into doing something which is wrong assumes that there is something wrong outside of the inquiry. But who says what's right and wrong? I do. Who am I? Now that said, right, what you're pointing to is...
does the mind hijack me and lead me into a trap that way?
Yeah.
Well, so...
Kind of traps me into...
I think the simplest way of looking at that is, is it interfering with the practice? Is
the mind cheating me, by creating that idea and binding me into some such habit in the guise of inquiring into it.
In the guise,
I'm just making a...
Sure.
Sometimes it does, because...
Right.
So
yeah, so I mean, in theory, it certainly could, right? Again, this is why I mentioned therapy. I mean, my take on it. See, my take on it is I don't love the idea of discipline.
You don't like that.
I don't love that idea. No, because I think it's very self-defeating often, right? And what actually needs to happen is progressive, like I said, progressively more authentic living, you might say, right? Whatever it is that you actually feel, whatever it is that you actually want, acknowledge that increasingly, right? That's the preparatory work that I would say. That's what happens in therapy, as far as I can tell. A greater ability to be authentic. And through that authenticity, it's not like it's static. It will also move over time. You might think that you want this X right now, and then you realize, oh, I'm having pursued X. I don't like X that much. Now I like Y. That's fine. But the idea is sort of like, whipping yourself into a certain kind of discipline. I mean, maybe it worked for some people, but I feel like overall, people deceive themselves into thinking they can do that. And the reality is that what we actually can do is just acknowledge what our deep desires actually are. That's probably the most we can do as far as that goes. My general preference is, it depends on the person. Again, it's very hard to make all full generalizations, but if you're interested in pursuing inquiry, I think you should pursue inquiry, and as you pursue inquiry, it will hit certain obstacles, and as you hit those certain obstacles, which are attachments, you can then look, into the particularities of that for you. So, for example, right, if it were the case that someone were drinking a lot, let's say, right, and they thought they were doing inquiry, but they're drinking a lot, it might be wise to take a certain skeptical eye and say, well, am I fooling myself in some way, But I think what will usually happen is, that if the drinking is a problem, it will manifest as a resistance eventually to the practice, right? That's not to say that self-deceit is totally impossible. Obviously, it's not. People can and do tell themselves they're being spiritual when they're in fact doing nothing of the sort. Tell themselves they're doing inquiry when they're not. And there's no foolproof defense against that, right? Other than, having mentors and maybe therapists and friends and other people who can check you and tell you, you're lying to yourself. But beyond that, there's no foolproof way. There's no rule that can be said about it, is what I guess I'm trying to say. Right. Except introspection and again, some kind of outside people who can give you some check or balance on it. That's how I would view it. Again, usually if there's undealt with psychological and emotional stuff, which honestly for most people there is, that will manifest itself eventually in barriers to the practice.
Yes.
You'll see you won't be able to do it at a certain point.
It's only a generic guideline, right? Sattvic food and things, that's a generic guide. Doesn't mean sattvic food alone is not going to take you to realization.
No. Correct.
But as you know, Shat Sampati and Sadhana Chatushtaya and Vedanta are pretty rigorous guidelines. You don't have to meet all of them, but you have to intend to meet them.
Right. And so, those guidelines.
So there's no wriggle room there, it's sort of.
But even with those disciplines, your mind
if you
can
follow that path.
fool you.
Yes, exactly. Correct.
Right?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be self-inquiry.
Yes.
Even by following
Yes.
those disciplines, your
Sure.
mind can fool you and
Yes.
say, hey, you are practicing this when indeed you're not.
Correct.
That's a good point, yeah.
Correct.
But
Exactly.
just to play a angel's advocate
Sure.
for discipline. So the way they describe discipline is like, there's a statement in Sanskrit, Siddhasya Lakshanani Sadhakasya Sadhanani. That means whatever comes naturally for an enlightened one becomes the practice for an aspirant. So we tried, what would Buddha do? I'm trying to do that in this context, in this event, in this situation. So that is the discipline, is how it is taught in yoga.
It's interesting, but how would you know what the Buddha would do? It's tricky because you how do we know what the Buddha would do? I hear what you're saying, and it's
For Buddha, he doesn't need not do anything.
Correct.
Buddha, already
The
he's
point is,
enlightened.
exactly.
The person who is highly evolved,
I don't think
they're
it's
always
just
kind, they're always truthful,
Well, maybe not. You know, these
Yeah.
these things are not entirely clear,
Yeah.
right? You know, we have certain stereotypes
Yes,
about how
exactly.
you know so-called enlightened people would behave, but
They're
these
very
need not
rude.
always be true.
Some of them are very
Some of them
rude.
are very rude. Yeah.
I called some astrologer, he's so rude with me. I thought he practices, I told you right, over phone he says, I'm like, you are asking me again and again, huh? He said,
No, Yogananda talks about the sages who would throw stones at people who
Exactly.
were near them. You know,
Exactly.
so you can, yeah.
It's hard to generalize. It's hard to
They
generalize.
just have stereotypes.
and
And the basic idea of trying to control yourself in this particular rigorous way, I just feel like very often leads people down the wrong path, because it's not sustainable for most people to do that. And if they do sustain it, it might be at a heavy cost in other ways. So I feel like it's better. I like the idea of psychologically being more like water or air, and sort of taking the soft path, right?
Maybe it's like trying to release that grip, the analogy that you gave.
Yeah, I mean, something more like that, exactly. Because again, in the kinds of therapy that I like, right, it's a much more subtle approach. It's not like, oh, you have to change this way. No, it's much more like, okay, well, let's see. Because the idea is, right, when we have these so-called self-sabotaging behaviors, they're not mere demons to be exorcised. No, they actually bear certain messages, Why are we in conflict with ourselves? Well, there's a reason for it, actually. And those reasons have to be discerned and attended to. Maybe we were damaged in a certain way in childhood and we've responded in a certain kind of way in response, and that has to be dealt with compassionately, rather than just say, oh, like you're a bad person for drinking. Does that really help anybody? No. So, it's just not useful, actually, to think that way for the most part. Whereas I think what is useful is, why are you drinking? What's the underlying need that is being addressed there, and can we address it in some other way? And make that person feel heard and understood, right? Which is much harder, but it's something like that. So I feel like the sort of like, I'm gonna tyrannize over myself and control myself in this sort of like harsh way. It's just, yeah.
But that type of obsession will lead you to go the other way also. So you say you don't want to eat sugar or sweets. You restrict yourself for so long, then one day you pig out on sweets.
Right, it's another issue. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. But the reality is, right, people go to sweets because, for example, right, because they're looking for some emotional satisfaction that they're not finding as somewhere else, So that has to be troubleshooted rather than just saying, oh, I'm going to set this resolution, no sugar, right? Like that's beside the point. The point is, why the sugar, right? And let's figure out what the actual underlying unmet need is,
But same, our own Vedas say everything in moderation. So as long as you don't go extreme, you should be fine. Your own body will tell you you're going extreme or not.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
You're absolutely right about the sugar. I never crave sugar, but there are times when I need it.
Exactly.
So it's like some emotional
Yes.
need, some need.
It's like self-medication.
Some need, yes.
It's what it is. Exactly. It is. It's exactly right. Yeah.
But I
And
will
for some
reach out
people,
for that.
yeah, exactly. So that's the way I like viewing it. Is like when these things come up, right? Especially these sticky attachments, right? They can often be indicative of something else in the psyche that needs to be dealt with. Again, very often it comes back down to family stuff. Often comes down to childhood stuff that has been undealt with. Like certain relationships to parents or siblings, things like that. Again, that's the stuff of therapy, but often those kinds of things are there, right? They're there in a subtle way, and continuing to influence our behavior.
I understand okay.
Hold on one second. I'll take the in-person question, then I'll take you in a second. Go ahead.
Oh, it's a very short, quick
Sure.
question. So, is my understanding correct that you are making a distinction between discipline and practice? So when you say practice of self-inquiry, it's not a
Yes.
discipline, right?
Well, yeah, you caught me out. This is a good question. So yeah, I mean, so here's the thing with self-inquiry. It is a practice. I would say, look, there's. I wouldn't call it a discipline only because I don't really advocate forcing yourself to do it if you don't feel like doing it, right?
Make
If you don't
it
feel
into
like
a habit, not a discipline.
if you, I mean, I encourage you to do it, but you should do it because you want to do it, right? If you don't want to do it, then okay, well, if you really didn't want to do it, there wouldn't even be an issue because you wouldn't be trying to do it. And if you're in conflict about doing it, then the question is, what are the two sides of the conflict, right? Part of you wants to do it, part of you doesn't want to do it. The part that doesn't want to do it is obviously connected to some attachments. So those attachments need to be investigated, basically. So because if they are strong enough, they are like presenting a repetitive barrier to practice, then you have to investigate them.
So it's like saying, here's the good idea, try self-inquiry, rather than saying you have to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, if you're passionate about it and want to do it, then of course I'm going to encourage you to do it all the time. Absolutely. So it's not like you, for the one who wants the goal, which is liberation, this is the means. Practice all the time, right? But I'm not advocating forcing yourself to do it if you really don't want to. If you really don't want to, then you shouldn't do it. Instead, you should be investigating why it is that there's this divided heart, basically, you might say.
People are not inclined in that way, you cannot do it, right?
Correct.
You won't even go
Well,
there.
that's right, exactly. We're really talking about a gray zone where people partly want to do it and partly don't want to do it. That's really what it is, right? People who really don't want to do it, there's not even an issue. People who really, really want to do it, there's no issue there either. They'll just do it, right? It's people who are like divided, which is most seekers most of the time, that this has to be investigated. Sorry, what was your question?
First of all, is it okay that I'm asking questions?
Of course, yeah, go for it, absolutely.
I wasn't sure if maybe the Zoom was different. Okay. Just going back to when we did the self-inquiry a little while ago.
Sure.
So my experience is there's an instant stopping of the mind's chatter, just instantly, and then the inquiry is just so peaceful and maddening at the same time. And what I noticed happens is there are these experiences that come reliably but not really predictably of like a momentary, like a flicker, I would describe it, and it's so fast. It's like a net gets taken away and I immediately panic and jump off or something like that. And I only recall it as the immediate memory, and it's something like I suddenly notice someone looking for something. I don't know how else to put that. And it never lasts more than a flash because I cannot, I don't know if I have a panic reaction to it or something.
Yeah, you might. It's possible. Because, it sounds like these little flickers of glimpses is what it sounds like. And that can precipitate fear in some people because it feels like, you could disappear or you could be annihilated in some way, which is not, it's not true. You're not going anywhere, actually. But because the I thinks of itself as the individual person, when the individuality seems to be under threat of revealing itself to be non-existent, it can feel fear. So it's quite possible that you're jumping away from it for that reason. That makes sense. And again, this is again and again the attachments, because the attachments are like, it's like you're trying to open a door, but you and step through it, but you have 20 people behind you who have ropes on you who are trying to pull you back, essentially. And so, despite that,
it's oddly, I can't think of a word for it other than familiar. That feeling in that little flicker is very.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Yes, of course, exactly. It's home. That's right, because you know it. There's an element of you which already knows it. So yeah, it's home. Exactly. It is familiar. Absolutely. Of course, that. Yes, that. Exactly. Yes. These are little glimpses you're having.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
So.
Okay, let's try this again.
I think it might be time to do another 10-minute thing. Let's do surrender this time. Yeah. Anyone? Any last questions before I do that? Let's do a little 10 minutes of surrender and see how that goes. Okay, so here goes. All right, you want to share their experience? Sure.
So, as opposed to yesterday my mind was very, very chatty.
Uh-huh.
And so I was observing that experience.
Uh-huh.
But today it was dead calm.
Uh-huh.
And my mind was labeling that as, hey, this is silence, it's just an experience. So that I kept doing that over and over again.
Great.
So, but that's not surrender, right? It's
Well,
still a labeling.
No, well,
It's
yeah, I
going
mean,
on.
you can use it as a stepping stone. I mean, you don't have to use a verbal labeling, but essentially, again, to use sort of analogy I kind of used yesterday, right? Imagine you're looking at, a beautiful lake or something like that, and there's a tendency for the mind to get, let's say, just lost in the image of the lake, right? And when you let's suppose you hear something like, I don't know, like a bird call, and suddenly you're summoned back to yourself, right? And you realize again, oh yeah, I'm here looking at this lake, right? That moment of like waking up, we want to provoke that moment continuously, or we want to stay awake. Another way, or no, we can view it as we're trying to stay awake, or we're continuously waking ourselves up, but that moment, and now, so that waking up thing can be facilitated if you want by actually labeling it, like, oh, this is an experience with words, but ultimately you don't need words. It's a purely non-verbal recognition of the experiential fact of this experience. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that continuous waking up process, so you don't get absorbed into the experience, but recognize that I'm separate from this experience. I'm here apart from this experience in juxtaposition to it, essentially. And so Ramana, at some point he said something like, the sage's mind may appear to be still, but it is actually spinning at a very high rate, like a gyroscope, essentially, because what's happening is that it's automatically, continuously engaged in this process of reawakening. You might say reawakening, meaning it's never getting absorbed in the experience. It's always reclaiming its attention, so to say.
But that's a great thing.
That's the way of looking at it, That's the way of looking at it. So it's never getting lost in any particular experience. By never getting lost in any particular experience, it therefore is, hey, it's this is self-abidance, because the self cannot be abided in directly. Self-abidance means non-abidance in anything particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this,
Same with inquiry.
This experience is not for me. It doesn't affect me.
Yeah, it doesn't affect me, but even more basic than that, the recognition that this experience is not me. That I'm here, that I is not this experience. Because there's that, again, when you have this experience, if you get lost in something, you merge with it, like you were saying earlier. We want to unmerge, essentially. Because when you merge with something, you identify with it. You identify with it, is essentially what happened. You are it for that moment. It's a beautiful experience, don't get me wrong. Merger is a beautiful experience, but we are trying to prevent ourselves from identifying with any experience, however beautiful.
No, it's not even experience. It's existence kind of a feeling. That it's not even experienced by you. It's already there kind of a feeling.
What is already there? So I mean, anything you're experiencing. That point is anything you're experiencing, even if it is a beautiful experience, to recognize that you as the observer are there separate from the experience, and to turn your attention away from the experience to recognize the observer fact.
That means that's merging, right?
Well, that's not merging. Merging would mean that you've lost self-consciousness, right? So in other words, when you're self-conscious, like, oh, I'm here, and this is that. When you lose self-consciousness, you drop that separation.
Oh, you're not away from that.
You're not away from it. You are it, right? So when it seems like you are it. I mean, you're not actually it, but it seems like you are it. And you don't have that normal sense of separation. In surrender, we're trying to keep that sense of separation actually, because why? Because the point is we're trying to come to a deeper something deeper than an object merger. We want merger with the self, not merger with the
We
object.
want to be observing even from, at that level.
Exactly. So we don't want to ever allow our attention to be wholly absorbed by any object, including objects of peace.
So when you surrender, you're offering basically your responsibility, everything to the Almighty.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So when you do it in that mode, so whatever you do, whatever your inner mind says, you do it without any will on your part, right? Whatever happens.
Yes, whatever happens,
you take
happens.
it as though it is happening.
Yes.
So how do you know what is to be done? Is basically your in whatever your mind says, you do it. Like
Well, even deeper than that, right? What is to be done is a thought, right? So your view is it's not my responsibility to deal with that. Something outside will have to determine what is to be done and whether it's going to be done or not, and all of those things.
But anyway, some thoughts come in to make you do things also, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So how do you distinguish between that versus the one you're willingly doing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. How do you determine whether your willpower is being used in something, right? Well, the answer is, there's maybe no foolproof test because the willpower itself is kind of an illusion. But I would say, you try your best to relax, and if you feel like you're clenched up and tense, relax. Relax as much as you possibly can, basically, and then whatever happens, happens. Yeah.
Or follow your intuition.
That's what I was trying to say. That's what he said. No, not the mind should not come here.
Yeah, I would say move towards a state of lower tension.
Yeah.
Move towards relaxation, because ultimately it's going to be like there's so many analogies, right? They're all imperfect, but it's like you're riding a horse, right? The horse is really doing the work, basically. You're just sitting there, right? Or Maharishi uses in one of these passages, right? You're being drawn by some bullock cart, exactly. So you can be relaxed in the cart, and the cart will do the work, or maybe it won't. Maybe it'll come to a stop. But whether it starts or stops or goes or it doesn't go, it's irrelevant to you. Your point is that you should be what feels like you. What feels like you. What do we mean by that? This will come to be clear through the practice. What feels like you should be relaxed.
Okay.
It turns out your body and your mind and all that is not really you. Ironically, it can be tense while you're relaxed. That's not a problem actually. But whatever feels like you will be relaxed. Now, initially, when you identify more with your body in this practice, it will seem like the only way for you to be relaxed is for your body to be relaxed. But eventually, it will become more and more obvious that you're not your body, and that the state of bodily relaxation is not required for you to be relaxed. And when that happens, you'll be able to be relaxed and the body will be able to do things. So, this will be seen over time, basically, more clearly.
So the more and more we keep repeating this, I feel like I am my thoughts.
It feels like you are your thoughts?
That's about it. Because the rest of all, the body and the mind will go away. It's the thoughts.
Well, the thoughts are
become
the thoughts are also things of which you're aware. They can't be you either. You're aware of them. If you were
They're
the
separate
thoughts,
from me,
you wouldn't be able to be aware of them. But you're right, they are subtler, for sure. It's hard to disidentify yourself from thoughts. Harder, easier to disidentify yourself from the body, basically.
Akilesh, could you expand on something you just said?
Sure.
Because it's very interesting that, you'll talk about Buddha and other kind of practices and teachings, and something you just said seems very different. A lot of, I guess, whether it's Buddhism or, modern people babbling about Buddhism, will say you should really question, is there a separation between you and that thing you're looking at, or, is there just the seeing and there's no seer. And you're talking about a practice here where we are kind of doing the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Don't try to merge with the experience.
Yeah,
Is that
correct.
right?
Correct, exactly. So that's right. So yeah, I think people get confused, not just in Buddhism, but also in Hinduism, right? They come to this idea, which is a confused idea that there is seeing but no seer. That's not true. So there's different worlds of discourse, you might say, okay? If there are seen objects, there is a seer. You can't have seen objects without a seer. If we're speaking in those terms, so self-realization, quote unquote, is not some state where there is seeing without a seer. If there is seeing, there is a seer. The question is there seeing?
Seer and the seen are the same.
Seer and the seen are two opposites of a pole, basically. They imply each other to some extent, but you can't have one without the other. If you're speaking of one, then you have to speak of the other. You're right that in some sense they are the same. In some deeper sense, they are the same.
Oh my God.
But initially in the practice, what we're trying to do is we're trying to focus on one side of this dichotomy exclusively, which is basically the subject, because it's the heart of the illusion, basically. And so with surrender and with inquiry in both cases, what we're doing is we're doing this continuous reawakening one way or the other towards the seer side of this, because this is a side where the illusion is based, essentially. It's not in the objects, it's in the subject, basically. Does that answer the question? Okay, great.
I was just going to add that in the Buddhist practices such as Vipassana, for example, the technique, and it's not dissimilar to Patanjali's, Vichara Samadhi, where you merge into the sensations of the body and you completely dissolve, and then a very rudimentary sense of self remains, which is asmita, very, very rudimentary. And then that finally disappears. And that shines, which is to shine, right? So that's kind of a path is the pratyahara, dharana, the withdrawal of senses, deep concentration, falling into meditation, falling into this state of different samadhis, then losing the sense of I becoming very rudimentary, and then that sense of I going away, right? Leading to something undescribable.
Yes.
Is kind of the path that, the Yoga Sutras does, and I from my understanding of Vipassana, it's a very similar approach. So wouldn't self-inquiry take you through those same steps in the sense that I'm not aware of my body or my sensation, I'm not merging with objects or my sensations, but in the process of hunting for the self, I'm probably falling into the same sort of samadhis, right?
Sure,
I'm losing my, my eye becomes softer, suddenly. Sometimes it does happen, right? I don't know who I am, where I am, what I am. I just know I am.
Yeah.
So
right.
I'm imagining that must be a Smita Samadhi. That's
it sounds right.
Rudimentary eye.
That's right. I mean, yeah. I mean, you could say rudimentary. You could say subtle. It sounds like it's really subtle, actually. And I'm not super familiar with the Yoga Sutras, so I don't want to comment outside of my area of expertise. But yeah, it does sound like that. Because what happens is when you do inquiry or you do surrender. Your experience of objects and of the subject go through phases of increasing subtlety. So, you identify with things and then you transcend those identifications. Then you identify with subtler things and then you transcend those identifications, and on and on and on, right? Because the subtler the thing is, the harder it is to see that it's there, right? Until ultimately, so to say, you have these equivalent of contact lenses, which are fused to your eyes, which is like the ego, which is the hardest thing of all to even see that it's there. We're kind of like coming backwards to try to discern this very, very, very incredibly thin film, which is over our so-called eyes, which constitutes the ego. But yeah, it does sound quite similar, actually. Anyway, now, that said, I'm sure there are some differences too. I just don't know what they are. But I do think that the fundamental yeah, I mean, the fundamental samadhi ideas of the Yoga Sutras are very pertinent, yeah, for sure.
So in both self-inquiry and surrender, what we're trying to do is increase the gap between the I and the objects.
Yeah, you could say so.
You're kind of increasing that distance by kind of.
Yeah, you could say so. Well, you're pushing more stuff out of what you think of as the I, has all this stuff in it, and then you're pushing more and more out of it, realizing actually this is object stuff. So the I becomes less and less, and you're right, there is a more and more of a distance. Simultaneously with that, the I is also expelling more and more content. You know, this is the theory. You know, this is Shankara's theory of superimposition, right? So there's on the so-called capital S self, there has been superimposed these ideas of what we are. What are these ideas? Ideas of like, I am the body, I am the mind, I am this thought, I have a past, I have a family, all blah, 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 right? So it's like, you know, I'll use the analogy sometimes of, like, you know, the old style slide projectors, you know, with the light coming up, right? And, you know, those transparencies, which you put on top, right? So imagine there's like a stack of such transparencies on top of this light, right? And we're looking for the light. In order to get down to the light, you have to sort of one by one move the transparencies, basically. These are the superimpositions, basically. And as you do that, the light becomes less and less distorted, essentially. And more kind of universal, less particular, or something like that, you know, subtler, however you want to call it, you know, less projected through all these other things. Yeah, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
So in your example of these transparencies, are these the conditionings?
Yeah, you could say they're the conditionings, they're the identifications, you know, they're
Vasanas.
the vasanas, exactly. Basically, things that you identify with. And so when we talk about this increasing distance, what happens is, because we have the in here and the out there. The in here is what we consider I, and the out there is what we consider not I. The in here, which consists of this set of transparencies that are as of yet unmoved, we are projecting, we're recognizing, oh, actually, I thought this was me, but it's actually not me. All this stuff that I thought was me was not me. You increasingly recognize that what I thought was me was not me. What I thought was me was not me. More and more it gets expelled outward into the object rather than the subject. And in this way, you know, it becomes simpler and simpler to see what remains, basically. Yeah.
Suddenly it brought me the image of the Big Bang. So the universe is expanding, right? So it's throwing out.
Yes.
And it's trying to find the core of who it is.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's a nice image. Well, it's interesting because, yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny, right? Because again, we're going through this process of piercing isolation of I, really, only ultimately for it to then come back and subsume everything that it previously excluded. Because the I will eventually prove itself not to be a separate thing, but rather something that has always included everything in some sense. So there's, you know, two swings of the pendulum, basically, you know, towards first this super laser beam like concentration on the super subtle object, but then when that's penetrated, it will then prove itself to be enveloping actually everything that has previously been excluded.
Yeah, I think that's why in Advaita Vedanta they also say sometimes that we are actually teaching you a lie when you discriminate, right? When you say you use the yoga of discrimination, say this is impermanent, drishya, and all that.
Yeah.
Eventually, it's a lie to get you there to know that you are actually everything.
Yes, exactly, right? Because the original, you know, you go to one side of the dichotomy and then the whole thing breaks down, you know, and it includes, but it includes it in a different way than when it began. So it's not like it was pointless. It's that the inclusion is coming from a different understanding now, because it's not just inclusion of everything as it was. It's also showing, in a sense, that your entire understanding of what was there in the first place was in some sense mistaken. Arguably. I mean, you can have many different stances on it, but because for example, right, you have again, speaking of Gaudapada, right, his doctrine is ajata, unborn, right, which Ramana also says is if he's going to pick a doctrine, if he's forced to pick a doctrine, this is the doctrine he'll pick, right, which is to say that what world? There's no world that ever came into existence. Well, what does this mean, actually? Doesn't mean what it seems to mean, but it's speaking to some profound element of the self-experience. That when one penetrates the so-called illusion, that the result is one way of putting it is, yes, the entire world is included. I am the entire world. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, there is no world. Nothing ever came into being. Nothing's happening in the first place. And there's no me who is separate from all of that. All of it cannot be spoken. None of it can be spoken. None of it can be said to exist at all. So, different ways of looking at it. But, and all of them are slightly off. But, yeah, because what is unity is the question. What does it mean to be unity? We got to be careful, right? Because simply saying I'm everything, it could be misleading. What does it really mean? What it really is meant is not that the I that is separate is everything, but that the I that is separate and the everything that is separate from it together as a unity is the true I. But as soon as you come back into the world of objects, now you do have a separation. Yeah. I mean, these are different discourses, basically. So you have to keep the integrity of the discourse. That's why we don't want to come into this idea because what can happen, for example, right? Again, speaking of glimpses, right? People have these glimpses, and in these glimpses, what seems to be the usual I appears to disappear. That's what a glimpse is. And it seems like in that case there is seeing without a seer. That's what it can feel like compared to the usual state of being. But the reality is that's misleading. There is a seer there. It's just that the seer is in a different mode than the usual seer. And that's why that's what enables us to say of these glimpses who experiences them. Someone experiences them, otherwise you couldn't have had it. It's an experience. It's had it. It's just not had in the usual way. So that's key. Because the thing is, we don't want to bring forth the impression. There's all kinds of misimpressions. Anyway, I don't know why I'm going into digressions here. But any other questions right now? If not, we'll go into another round of 10 minutes of self-inquiry. I think that would be the next thing. But so far, any questions?
So is this the lamp and the light analogy you're giving here?
Which lamp-light analogy are you talking about here? There's several.
So it's we talked about self. So there is no self. Existence of the self is not possible without the awareness around, which is if you take the lamp and you put it into a room, it lights up the room. Lamp and light, though are different things, one is the result of the other, but light cannot exist in the absence of the lamp.
Light cannot exist in the absence of the lamp. Okay, right. So what do the lamp and light consist of here? What are they representing?
The world and you were talking about the world and the self, right? The experiencer and the experienced.
Yeah, experiencer and experienced are mutually interdependent.
And the
that
seer
way.
and the seeker.
Yeah, seer and seen. Correct. Yeah. Exactly. That's right. Exactly. The self with the capital S is slightly different because the self with capital S is It's not an object like these two. These are both are objects. Seer and seen are essentially objects. I mean, even though one of them is a subject, but but even the subject is an object. You know, that's the point of this whole inquiry. But the self is beyond these ideas, actually. You know, so it's not consisting. It's not a pair. It's not part of a pair.
But the pair leads you to.
The pair leads you to it, right? We go from the common sense, you know, obsession with one side of the pair, which is the object side of the pair, to the subject side of the pair,
and from there it goes.
And from there beyond. Exactly, precisely. Actually, before we go into suffering, let me go to verse number 2 of this, just for kicks. Right? Anyway, it's going to reinforce what we've been talking about. So verse number 2 in the Narpa, the Anubandham says, not by listening to preachers, nor by the study of books, not by meritorious deeds, nor by any other means can one attain that supreme state, which is attainable only through association with the sages and the clear quest of the self. So it's very clearly saying, right? It's not words, it's not ideas, it's not good deeds, and it's not any other kind of objective means that can lead you to this. Only, essentially, the sages, and what do the sages do? We already know from verse 1 what the sages do. The sages help you quell your attachments, and from that, they can have that mental peace, which allows the inward looking. That's the clear quest of the self. That inward looking alone leads you to liberation. Nothing else can do it.
Can I?
Sure.
So there's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that is very similar. It says not by the 11th chapter, like Naham Veder, Natapasa, etc. Same thing. Not any deeds, not any yajna, not any study of scriptures, not by doing charity.
Yes.
But then the final segment is different.
Tell me.
So it doesn't say the self can be attained only through self-inquiry. In that specific verse, it says bhakti.
Bhakti, yes.
So
Well, what is
one
bhakti?
thing-
Yeah.
Bhakti is surrender.
Yes, exactly. Correct. That's Maharishi's viewpoint anyway. Maharishi's viewpoint is bhakti is surrender, and in fact, surrender and inquiry are all the same, right? These are all the same, these are all different words for the same thing. Because what is bhakti ultimately? Bhakti is total devotion.
Yes.
When you're total devotion, that's surrender.
Ramana says you cannot surrender.
Contemplate on that.
You cannot surrender without affection and love to the God. You surrender yourself completely to the God. That's surrender. That's a true surrender, right?
Correct.
It's like
exactly.
when we love something, the mind automatically goes towards it. It's like
Yes.
Right.
Well, when you love something, when you love God, you want to give the one you love everything. That's the idea.
Okay.
And the greatest thing you can give would be your very
Yourself.
self, basically, your individual self anyway.
Yeah.
makes sense. Yes.
And in that fact, you'll be free.
It's interesting. We saw from yoga sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's from the other. A lot of these verses, you know, are taken from
Compiled
elsewhere.
different sources.
Exactly. Some of the stuff he wrote himself, but most of the things are from elsewhere.
Akilesh, sage here again is the person who's
Learned.
realized it, right? And
Sage
Yes.
is also God here.
Yes. You can view it in different ways. You can view it as
Guru,
the one who.
God, everything.
You can view it as the guru. You can view it as God.
Yeah.
Correct. And Ramana is again, the one whose presence you feel peace as the guide to the seeker.
Yes. So whoever is an awakened master would be the sage, not a normal teacher. The reason for this, they put the preacher and the sage apart.
Yes.
Is to say a traditional scholarly teacher is not the sage, right?
Yes. Correct.
Rishimani.
It's not enough. It's not enough to have
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah.
They have to have some kind of experiential
Yes.
sense of it. I mean, I do think you can view the sage in a larger context. Where
Okay,
there are
like
there are
Krishnan
people.
said it can be, yeah.
It could, exactly, and it could be that people are, they might be a sage for you in this situation now. Maybe they won't be a sage for you later. People might have different stages in their life where they're experiencing different
Yeah.
teachers, things like that. Whoever can move you forward in your quest
Right.
for your moment, this moment is in a way a sage. But yeah, exactly. The point being that it's not mere words, but rather, some kind of experiential thing. Yeah. So with that, let's do 10 minutes of
So a lot
song.
of emphasis is given to the sage, right, in these verses.
Yes,
First
correct.
fire like that.
Yes, correct. Correct.
So there is something to be taken from there, which means keep associating with sages.
I think
Right?
seek the sources of peace, basically, in a way, is what it's saying, right? Because you can argue, right? Like I was saying in the Uddhava Gita yesterday, Uddhava is the sages for him are the winds and the plants and the animals, So I think in certain circumstances, right? Places that are holy, people that are holy, they can all be sages in a way, right? And though he is talking about not the study of books, right? At the same time, it's also true that I think the study of books can give you, in a sense, a kind of satsang with the sages of old, So the point is, it's not the dead letter study of books.
Right.
That's the point, right? In some sense, when you read the scriptures, you are in satsang with the previous sages. So, and then of course the final and most important sage being the inner silence of some sort.
You mentioned that yesterday, right? The guru doesn't have to be alive. Guru
Exactly.
is inside.
Yes.
Correct.
Guru is Ramana is guru.
Yes.
Ramana is no longer
Right.
in physical body, but Ramana is always there.
Right.
Exactly.
But he's transmitting through his words,
Yes.
Yes.
So in that sense, his words are him,
Yes.
in a sense, yeah.
Yes, exactly. But this to be distinguished from just the pure scholarly study of it as just ideas, basically, but rather to allow that to resonate at some deeper level with you, whatever that means. All right, let's do.
And the deeper reverence and adoration that comes with that through the whole process is again beneficial for self-inquiry, you would say? Because, that's part of this, right? The reverence that you have for the sage and
Yes.
deep admiration or,
I think it's an interesting question. I think
it's a kind of form of bhakti, right?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of
The reverence is such a
receptivity, like a certain kind of receptivity to it, because the faith and the love that you put in the ideas may open you up in a certain way, right? Whereas one who's just viewing it as a set of intellectual ideas to be thought about is not taking it in the same way. Yeah, I think that may be the thing. Whereas, right, if you take anything in a way you take seriously as a kind of gesture of love, from that person, and you allow it to come in. I think that's a sage-like relationship, versus if I'm treating it as like an object to just be dissected, then it would just be the mere study of books.
Okay.
But you can take, according to Ramana, guru doesn't have to be in physical form,
Sure.
right?
Yes.
No, I understood that, yeah.
Correct.
Even Ekala is there, right? He did it without any guru. Then he did the dashina to the guru.
Except that a live teacher can give you feedback,
Yes.
because
Correct.
otherwise you imagine attainments you don't have. It may not
Sure.
be there.
No,
So you need some checks and balances.
Sure. The life teacher
So live teacher is important for
can
that.
be very, very useful.
The live
Absolutely.
teacher comes in if you really want the God will come as a guru
Yes,
in
yes.
front of you to teach you.
Yes, exactly.
Otherwise, you could be self-delusional, right?
Sure,
you could imagine
sure.
certain attainments that which are just mind states.
Sure,
But
absolutely.
I think
Correct.
in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna assures us
Yeah.
when
Yeah,
you
that's
are
all.
ready and when you need, I will send them.
Well, that's right, exactly.
And
I mean, it's a
then
very
there is
ancient.
assurance.
Yes. And there's an ancient saying, right? When the student is ready, the teacher will come.
Yeah.
And again, the opportunity is when you say the teacher comes, but many may not tune into that opportunity and not
Are
show up.
ready for it.
Yes.
And
No,
not
no,
show
not
up.
true.
Yes.
Not true though.
And you will show up when you're ready to show up.
Yes, exactly.
That's
It's
kind of what it
it's
is.
No, but
exactly.
they say that guru is also waiting for you, not that
Yeah,
the-
yeah.
the-
I think they're all saying the same
burden,
thing, but in
right?
different ways.
What's his name? When he came, he
Yeah.
went to Shankaracharya. He said, "Your guru is waiting in Tiruvannamalai. Go there."
Yeah.
So he said, Richard, like Paul Brenton came to searching for guru, right, in search of secret.
Yeah,
So he went to India, all over the place. He didn't go to. He first see Ramana. He didn't think that he was his guru. He went away. Then he came all around and came back to Kanji. Kanji Swamigal said, "Your guru is waiting there."
Yeah, you'll be rooted.
Yes.
You'll be rooted to them eventually.
That's
exactly
a
right.
real, actual
Yes.
happened.
That's
They
right.
have written, even Paul Brenton himself has written that.
Yeah. I believe it. No, you'll be rooted to the right person eventually. If you're seeking if you're seeking the teacher, that you will find the teacher eventually, for sure, whatever that teacher may be.
I just saw the sneak peek of the third. And I had a question on that.
Going ahead of the rest of the class, huh? Go ahead, tell me, huh? Yes.
You're always the most avid student.
Yes, exactly. Well, we'll read it out. So when one has learned to love the company of sages, wherefore all these rules of discipline?
Yeah.
When a pleasant, cool southern breeze is blowing, what need is there for a thing?
So I had a question on that.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So it's like saying, like, why do you need all the stones? Find a diamond. I mean, it's easier to do discipline than to
Sure.
find a sage.
Sure.
That's the
I
logic
mean,
here.
there's some truth to that. Yes. I mean, but again, I think in a way, what he's really pointing to is that the one who has like an open heart in some way, who is receptive and who has some faith, will be able to shortcut these discipline things. Yeah, because if you have faith in what is said, right? If someone really believes, it's not given to everyone to have that kind of belief. Unfortunately, it's a matter of grace. You see,
It's very difficult to say what happens, right? Say, you have seen a lot of stories on people who find somebody accidentally finds a guru.
Yeah.
Stories like that, but there are people who search and finally
They
find the
don't
guru
find it.
also. Right? There are both cases are there.
Yeah. Well, but someone who really, the thing is, someone who takes with great faith whatever is said to them. It might even be coming from the wrong person, but that person then becomes a sage to them. And it's that ability. It's the ability of the person to surrender, essentially, the natural inbuilt ability to surrender like that. You see, which is it's definitely a matter of grace, no question about it. But it's encouraging if you can let go and invite in, this influence, then you won't regret it, essentially. Yeah, I mean, faith is ultimately that some higher power is going to be organizing your life, right? So when you say, for example, right, like, I can't find the right teacher, but certainly something has been given, right? And so, whatever is there, if you put your faith in that, right? It's like so many stories in Hinduism, right? Of, it could be something like a puja or a ritual or something like that, but done with great faith, it suddenly becomes transcends its usual function, and it leads the little boy or girl to something much greater than they otherwise would have expected, because they did it with such faith, So there's something to that, that love is a shortcut, essentially. Love of God is a shortcut, basically. If one is blessed with that, That's why it's in the Gita, right? I mean, if you can do this, you can't do that. If you can, it goes through a whole sequence, right? It finally says, if you can just remember me, then you don't have to do any of the other stuff, basically, right? That's bhakti. So, through that, the bhakti is almost independent. It almost creates the teacher, If you have that desire, the deep heart desire to surrender, then the teacher will manifest in one way or the other, basically, in response. But, easier said than done to have that in the first place, to be that person. Because most people are of a much more critical mindset, is the truth, and for them it'll be much harder. Mm-hmm. It's okay, I mean, they'll still get there. It'll just be a longer path.
So what is the takeaway for this? Therefore, all the rules of discipline. So what's the takeaway?
What they mean is, once you found your quote-unquote sage, if you take in what they say and are able to basically believe in it and let go, right? What is surrender? Surrender is letting go, right? There's no other discipline that's required than that. And what is the discipline? The discipline there is simply letting go in a continuous fashion, right? Yeah. Once you let go, then you're beyond all duties, basically. Right. So he's saying, in a way, let go to the sage. But essentially, what it really just means is let go, period.
Let go, period.
Yeah. And if you can do that, then you're not bound by anything further.
When the surrender is total, it's sort of, it's like a super set of all disciplines.
Yeah, well,
anyway,
I mean, it's a short. Well, I'm not sure. When you say it, do you mean that you become disciplined automatically?
Not necessarily, but what I would the path of getting there through all the disciplines is this is in fact a shortcut.
It's a shortcut because absolutely because surrender and inquiry are the master are the master tools to quiet the mind and go beyond it.
Because in true surrender there is no one who's practicing discipline even, right?
Yes.
So I mean, it becomes irrelevant whether
Yes,
I'm disciplined
irrelevant.
or not. That's
Exactly.
what I mean.
If you can't sustain it, then absolutely you don't need anything
Because
else.
who's practicing discipline?
Precisely.
Nobody there to practice discipline.
Precisely, exactly. So it's only discipline's only for those who cannot do that.
Correct.
They have to go basically. So with that, let's do 10 more minutes of inquiry, and then we'll call it for today, or we'll discuss it and then call it. So let's do that. We'll call it for the moment, not the day. We have an evening session.
Yeah. You did self-inquiry.
Self-inquiry, yes.
Geeta, you want to do self-inquiry?
Right here. I'm hearing everything.
Suspended
But
to do
practical.
list.
All right. Any experiences?
So the feeling of that silence also I feel is coming from outside. Like the whole thing, all the combined feeling and everything is at a distance. It's coming from making me feel the silence. Like
Okay. And then what about the observer of the silence?
which
The observer of the silence.
observer silence is merged with the silence. Observer's silence.
Observe that.
But that silence is there. Silence is at a distance. That is like persistent kind of a feeling. It's not from here and it's outside. It's there. I feel it, and then the feeling is also. I was focusing on who feels that silence, right?
Exactly.
And it's not telling any words or anything of the sort. I'm actually trying to feel where it is coming from.
Good.
And then
That's great.
it's a collective thing of then coming from outside and making me completely feel inside to outside, and then I feel that it's at a distance. It persists kind of a feeling.
Yeah. Good. It's good. The one who is trying to find
Yeah.
that very one, the very one who's trying to find.
Uh,
You're looking for the one who's the finder.
fine.
Finder is looking for the finder.
Yes,
You
the
know?
finder is at a distance kind of a feeling.
And that feeling is itself a feeling
Feeling from outside.
of which you're aware.
Aware that it is not like previously I was trying to locate inside, right? It was not there.
Now it seems outside.
It's
too.
outside, and then also making everything collectively make me feel that kind of a feeling.
And so the next step is to notice, right? Again, outside is also a feeling. Outside is also a feeling.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Outside is also a feeling.
Outside is also.
Of which, again, you're aware. And again, to go to the one who's aware of that feeling.
Yeah. I would go to that. Yeah, it's not outside. But it's not even outside. It is at a distance, kind of a feeling, or it's coming from there. Like it's not definitely me or me together inside or outside, kind of a feeling.
That entire feeling is a feeling. Just to be clear.
Yeah.
You know. So you are separate from that.
Yeah.
Right. And the one who is aware of that entire complex of feelings, you need to look for that one. Look for you.
Yeah.
Really.
So I try to look for that, and then I feel that that exists always. When I searched it, I thought it exists always, kind of a feeling.
It exists always. Well, I mean that's true, but again, that's another feeling, or that's another
It's
thought.
again that's
Exactly. You see that?
It's a thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a thought. You see that?
Yeah.
Because we can have these spiritual ideas come up. Yeah, like
And I know, like, yeah.
I'm
But I try
timeless and
not to be
spaceless.
associated with anything imposing my
Yes.
previous knowledge, imposing anything of this.
Perfect.
I'm trying to
You just notice
feel it, like experience it, kind of.
exactly. Experience, and yes, and then your language is revealing, right? So again, right? Because what happens is it's like we're looking for ourselves, but we're starting from like this side, and we're looking in this entire sphere up to like here. Like we're looking around, right? And really, we want to be turning the camera on ourselves, but we look at everywhere except this. This is how the mind works.
But we started from here, right?
Oh, I know. Well, I mean metaphorically. I mean metaphorically. See, we're looking at the objects, right?
Yeah.
And we avoid looking at the subject, basically.
Yeah.
So just to notice, right? It's normal, basically. This is the way the mind works. But in every case, again and again and again, whatever it is you may be thinking or feeling, to keep recognizing this too is an object. This too is an object. And I must be separate from that somewhere. Where am I in this picture? Where in this picture am I?
Yeah.
But good, no, it's good. I mean, this is just part of the process. I'm just clarifying, basically.
Yeah.
Else, go ahead.
Maybe I just started.
No, please.
Today. Not had all that time as you all have. But that let go word which you have been emphasizing from the time I've come. So when I sat in the meditation, that was the first thought which is resonating, and it's making somewhere my spirit at whatever it is that liberating, that I can feel myself getting lighter because I'm giving permission to myself to let go. Whichever is holding or whichever is making me not, because I'm scared of whatever is that unknown.
Yes.
That's unknown which I am not aware.
Yes.
So I don't know if I'm still holding on to those connections or those whatever is making me grounded in this.
I mean, it's interesting because I mean, you know, you're pointing out something which is intriguing, and it's true, right? You know, just as surrender is implies a certain form of inquiry, because as you objectify the experience, you automatically move towards I, because there's nowhere else for your attention to go. In the same way, in inquiry, at some level, it facilitates, and it also is facilitated by a notion of letting go, which is a surrender sort of notion, but it is, because only when you let go, like you said so well, are you able to allow yourself to move towards the unknown.
Yes.
But it's funny because the unknown is only unknown to the mind.
Yes.
Right? It's actually known, like I think you said home, or no, did you say home? Someone said home. Maybe it was someone online, I forget. Anyway, but the point is, right, it's actually known. It's actually completely known. It's the most known thing of all, but it's just not known to the mind. You know, the mind can't see it, so it assumes that it's non-existence. But actually, it's home, and it is it's most intimately known, basically. But yes, it requires a certain letting go to allow that to happen. Definitely.
But that feeling is a very deep feeling, I feel.
Which feeling?
The feeling of the quietness or quietness, and where that feeling is coming from, who is feeling it.
Yes.
And then it looks like it's coming from outside, but it also, you feel like we have a strong emotion we face in life, and how you feel inside. That's a kind of feeling also comes at the same time, it's coming from outside kind of feeling.
Right. No, it's true. I mean, it is in a way outside. The feeling is in a way outside.
Yeah, from outside. And also I feel my whole organs, whole body organs participate in it, kind of a feeling. Like my eyes are shedding tears, and then when my stomach is also cooperating, and then my heart is really like so much of emotion inside, lots of feeling. And but the difference from my pain feeling or my problem feeling from outside problem is different from the other feeling, because it's coming from where, outside, and it's integrated kind of a feeling.
Well, so it's a very powerful, positive feeling.
Powerful, positive feeling. That organs also feel it, participate in that whole feeling.
Yeah. That makes sense. And this is part of, I mean, this can be invoked as part of like the peace that is coming as part of the process, right? But again and again, I'm just re-emphasizing, right, to again turn towards what is aware of it, because in the process of going towards it, right, these are peaceful states that the mind is going through, right? But we're trying to look for the state that underlies them all, you might say, or something underlies even these states.
Yeah.
Which is again, because the question is, again, where are you in this picture? Where are you? No matter what is said, where are you? You know. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, these powerful, peaceful states can involve the whole body. Yeah.
So this is again which layer we have got rid of.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't it, when you were talking about the transparency thing?
Yes.
Which layer we have got rid of, and how deep are we able to go down? Yes, exactly. Let go.
So when you have a state of profound silence, right, it's very close, right? It's very propitious for asking at that moment, where am I? Because in that moment, it's a very like relatively clear reflection of your face, you know? So I'll use this analogy sometimes as well of like, imagine there's a lake, okay? And on this lake, there are many things reflected, right? Like faraway mountains, trees, etc., right? And so, you can think of our mind as, with all its usual distractions and attachments, as having its attention dispersed over the surface of the entire lake, right? It's reflecting all these different things, like the mountains and the sky and all of that, right? Through the deliberate, continuous application of the practice, the first thing that happens is the scope of the attention is narrowed, right? From many things to a narrower circle, until finally, through intense effort, in any particular moment, you might get it down to a very, very narrow section of the lake, and now it's reflecting, let's say, your face. This would be like a moment of profound peace, basically a moment of profound peace. In that moment, then the question has to occur, who's aware of the reflection of this face?
Do we get very emotional also when we start inquiring?
It can be, absolutely, because what happens, it can be emotional, it can be painful, because inquiry and surrender can effectively lower essentially some of the usual defenses we have against our emotions, which is one of the reasons why we fear it, actually, and one of the resistances to it, because things can pour in that we might otherwise be keeping at bay, so yeah, that absolutely can happen. But my point, so we get down to this, we get down to one way or the other, we get down to this face, which is a sense of silence, and then if we have a moment of recognition, like, oh yeah, this is me, that aha moment, that's a glimpse, however long it lasts, and if the recognition is, so to say, permanent, quote unquote, in some sense, if the whole puzzle is seen through, because there's a kind of puzzle here, then it's not a glimpse anymore. That's just realization. But that's basically the structure of the whole process. To bring our attention from many things to one thing, and from one thing to recognize what that one thing, which is the concentrated mind, the silent concentrated mind. What is it reflecting? Because a silent concentrated mind is the blissful mind. And the question is, what is that bliss a reflection of? Because we don't want to have to come to this bliss even through the effort of the practice. Yes. But rather, we're trying to recognize that we are that bliss at all times, whether or not we put effort into the practice or into anything else, basically.
So it automatically comes.
It will automatically.
You reach the state.
It automatically is, actually. In fact, it already is. The truth is, yeah.
That's not the right word.
Exactly. It is the case. It is the case already. Actually, right now it's the case. Well, that's the irony, right? Because right now the truth is, you're already the self, and the self is actually speaking, unaffected by your so-called ignorance. The self is already in a state of perfect bliss, meaning you are in a state of perfect. You are bliss. Actually, that's the truth. There's no such thing as ignorance. Really, is the truth. But we have to pretend and play the game. There's a game being played. We're playing this game. And the end of the game will be to realize there was no game. Something like that. Yeah.
So the perfect, tranquil lake that reflects presents a perfect replica. So is it correct to say that we still need some skill to use that perfect mirror, because we can get carried away by looking at the reflection of some trinket, not at your face?
Well, right. Well, no, right. So that's why I said, right, we're narrowing our focus to this sort of small section. There's sort of a mixture here of different things here, because there's, I know there's metaphors about lakes and the stillness of the lake. Mm-hmm. There's also metaphors about, I was using lakes and the many things it's reflecting. Mm-hmm. So these are actually different ways of describing the same thing. Because one way you could say the same thing as the lake is very ruffled, many winds that are on it, and it's moving in many waves, and the purpose of the practice is to still the surface of the lake. And once the surface of the lake is still, then we look into it for our reflection. The reflection is blissful because the lake is still. The mind being still is blissful. The mind being concentrated and focused is blissful. So one way of saying that is the surface of the lake is stilled. But I wasn't using the dichotomy of the disturbed lake versus the still lake. I was using a slightly different lake metaphor, which was the lake reflecting many things versus reflecting one thing, or rather our attention. There's a still lake in my metaphor. There's a still lake, but it's reflecting many things. The question is where our attention is. It's not like when you look at your face in the lake that it stops reflecting the mountains. Technically, that reflection is still there if you care to look at it, but your focus is on just this one narrow point. It comes to the same thing. It's just slightly different ways of looking at it. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So, but the point being that, once you come to the stillness, there's no issue of trinkets anymore because there's just the stillness. Only question then is, where are you vis-a-vis the stillness? The one who is appreciating the stillness, where are they?
Okay,
So is that the question we should be always asking?
Well, I mean,
Is that the way?
that's an intellectual, we don't want to ask that question verbally per se,
No,
because
but, when we are doing it,
you're always hunting I. That's
Okay.
just as simple as that, right? Because when you hunt the sense of I, or you hunt the sense of awareness, you will automatically go through these various phases, and you'll eventually, if you focus on it long enough, hard enough, and whatnot, you'll eventually end up at the stillness. And then you just apply the same thing again. It's not really worthwhile to think about who's aware of the stillness in the abstract. You want to actually follow I. When you follow I, you will come to the stillness. When you're there at the stillness, then you can say who's here, who's here appreciating the stillness, and where is this observer? Where is the observer located, or what is the observer? Who is the observer? Or what is the sense that I am the observer, that I'm still here, this still here-ness, even of the merger experience itself, again, that's misleading, because the one who's aware of the merger is there. They're there. It's subtle, extremely subtle, but there. So, that's the task, to track down in your experience, in the extreme subtlety where it seems like you are no longer there. It almost seems like you're no longer there, but you are still there. You're still there as the observer to the experience of almost being not there. And that, trace that. And when through continuous attempts to do this, enough peace has been reached, enough times when through that peace, the attachments have been sufficiently weakened because one is so dedicated to this peace that one is no longer caring so much about anything else, then at a certain point in time, you'll be able to let go and allow yourself to see the truth. Because you're the main barrier to seeing the truth. You yourself, the resistances that are represented by the attachments, the attachments that are linked to the identity as a person, that person which is afraid of fading into non-existence or being rendered, a fictional entity, will stop its resistance eventually, because eventually it will trust that it will not actually be destroyed, but rather that there is something profound and holy that is there to be obtained.
Interesting. All this time for the last 10 minutes when you asked us to prompt us to do meditation, I was there, right above your head. So what I see, Ramji with Guha, right? And so everything that what I was picturing is Ganges and this whole event happening, and I am witnessing that conversation, just right above your head. So this is
That's
my
what through you.
state.
That's what through your head.
That's what's going through, and I was an observer of this whole conversation happening.
You are into Ayodhya now.
I was in Ayodhya. Yeah.
But we can't see. There's a picture above my head of
No, this is
various gods.
Guha.
Yeah, no, this is Guha and Ramji.
Rama.
Oh, perfect. Yes.
Rama is embracing.
And
Yes.
there's a beautiful song, Telugu song, which goes like this. When there is breeze, there is no concept of being sultry,
Uh-huh.
right? So there is a wind, third verse was going like that, right? So Krishna garu Miru, I don't know if you remember this song.
అదే అడుగుదాం అనుకున్నాను
So
విషయం.
the song goes like this. I'll sing it the way it is. ఈ గాలికెంత దిగులు, actually ఈ గాలికెంత గుబులు, ఈ గంగకెంత దిగులు. The nature of the water Ganges is wetness.
Mm-hmm.
That wetness is starting to feel wet, it seems,
Mm-hmm.
because Rama is being let go
Ah.
from Ayodhya, and the breeze, the wind, is feeling very sultry. And this is my 10 minutes.
Very beautiful.
Poetic.
We never thought that this would invoke this much.
That is exactly what it, yeah. And it says this Nava, that means my boat, no matter what I do, is not moving, is what Guha is singing this song to Lord Rama.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah,
Very nice.
it's not moving. And you are the one who would shepherd all the boats which would need to be shepherded to move through this entire chakra. What is this little lake for you?
Okay.
Samsara.
You need my help.
Wonderful.
This-
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
All right, anyone else?
Yeah. I was also reading the Ramayana in the morning, right? And then there it says Janaka is such a nice king. Nobody will do anything wrong, and he will always be very fair. And also there is a concept of he does the Ashwamedha Yaga just for the sake of the people, and he wants a kid badly, Rama, but he knows that he is going to have kids and all. But still his idea is thinking of only Logatchema. And so he conducts the yaga, and then the kid is born. That's what and also he appoints his ministers, all scholarly saints and all. And then I suddenly remember Modi appointing the yogis as ministry. So this is borrowed from the Ramayana. I mean, all the ministries are scholarly saint people. So because he does not want to go against anything fairness, so we always talk very high of Rama. But Dasara acquired all this fairness and everything. Dasara has got everything.
All right. Well, I think with that, I think we're pretty much over for this session,
Yeah.
and we'll meet again this evening. What time is it?
Like 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Is
Yeah,
okay. Perfect.
6 to 7:30.
6 to 7:30. Okay, this
I
evening.
know in
In
Savita
Savita.
Nanjan's house.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much
Thank
for your
you.
presence.
Yeah, because we all are thinking of Rama now. The